Welcome, travelers, to my realm of nightmares. Allow me to be your personal assistant. Come in, take a seat, get comfortable. For when you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.
Joe sat on the couch, watching the commercial with his father. They had filmed the commercial using the remainder of their excess spending money. Finances had been tight. They needed to try to drum up some extra business at the coffee shop. The TV played in the background. Come to Joe and Pop's Coffee Shop, where we do coffee right. All of our own blends are crafted on site. Your taste buds will not be disappointed. We are starting our pumpkin spice blend tomorrow, and the first 500 customers get a 50% off discount. See you then. Right after the commercial was over, the phone rang. It was Pop's vendor. He called with some bad news. Hey, Pops, due to the pandemic, I can't get you the ingredients you need for your pumpkin spice latte. I'm sorry, man, but if you want, I can get you in touch with a friend of mine that can get you what you need. So his vendor gave Pops the number and the name of his contact, and Pops called him immediately following the conversation.
Hello?
A gruff voice answered after a few rings.
Who are you, and how'd you get this number?
Hi, Tyler. You can call me Pops. Mark told you I was calling? He said you can get me the ingredients I need for my home blend of pumpkin spice. Pop finished, hoping on all hope that he would get the answer he wanted.
Oh yeah, he did mention that. Yes, I can get you what you need for a price, of course.
He finished with a chuckle. Of course. How does 500 sound? I mean, I can't afford much currently, but I can pay you more later down the road. Pops finished. He was worried he might not be able to pay the man enough.
You know what, Pops? Normally, I charge far more, but I like you. You sound like good people. I'll have you stuffed to you by 6 a.m. tomorrow.
Pops finished by thanking the man and hung up the phone. Pops looked at his son and spoke. Well, Joe, it's time to head to bed. Hopefully, we will have a very busy day tomorrow. Joe got up and headed towards his room, with Pops close behind. The next morning, Pops and Joe were at the coffee shop at 5 a.m., ready to get the coffee blended, brewed, and ready to serve before 9 a.m. rolled around and the doors opened up. They got all the ingredients ready. He had cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, cloves, allspice, and yes, that very special ingredient that made Pop's pumpkin spice the best in the county. Many have asked him what it was, but he would never tell. Joe wasn't even privy to it just yet. By the time 9 a.m. rolled around, there was a line from the front door practically wrapping around the entire building. I guess the commercial did the trick, Pops thought to himself. The second the doors opened up, excited patrons flew into the shop. Pops had even thought of clever names for the size of drinks, just for fun. A customer walked to the counter. Hi, Pops. Can I get a baby spice latte for the missus and a king pumpkin for myself? He said. The coffee flew off the shelf, and before he knew it, he had sold over 100 cups of coffee, then 2, then 5. Everyone in the town must have shown up for his coffee. This brought a smile to Pop's face, until the first customer dropped to the ground, foaming at the mouth. Joe, being the kind soul he was, ran over to the patron and checked on him. Before Pops knew what was happening, more and more patrons dropped to the ground. The first one had stopped convulsing. Pops was on the phone dialing 911 when he heard the scream. He looked over and saw the first man on top of Joe, biting his face. Blood was everywhere. Pops was frantically shouting at the 911 operator that the patrons were attacking his son. As this was happening, others stood up, shambling towards Pops. He had a choice to make. Should he grab a shotgun and defend himself, and possibly help his boy, but hurting innocent people in the process? Or go back into the back and hunker down? Before he could make the choice, it was made for him. His boy stopped screaming. lying there still, not breathing. Pops ran into the back, barricading the door. After felt like an eternity, he heard the police sirens. The officers could be heard shouting at the patrons, but soon enough, he heard gunfire. Then, it was absolutely quiet. Pops slowly exited the back to see his son's body, and the bodies of the few patrons that had not drunk the pumpkin spice lattes. He exited the shop, and was shocked to find the officers dead. They had killed some of the patrons that attacked them. Unsure of what to do, he went searching for anyone that might still be alive. The town looked abandoned. Pops did not want to call them zombies, but they shambled around and ate people. What else could he call them? He finally came to a church. It was an old stone building that'd make for a great shelter. He knocked on the front door, but received no answer. So he opened the door, and there stood one man, the pastor. "Oh, thank God, Pastor, you're still alive." However, as he drew closer, he noticed the pastor had turned. The pastor attacked him and Pops killed him. The situation and the grief overwhelmed him as he heard the horde approaching. So, as one last act of defiance, he cocked a shotgun and made his death swift. Luna woke up. She stretched out her hand to the nightstand to grab her phone. 12 a.m. Figures, she said to herself, sitting up in bed. She blinked, not quite awake, and let the cover slip from her upper half as she yawned. She put her feet on the floor and got up and made her way to the bathroom. After using it, she changed her pad and put on fresh panties and threw her chosen bra on her desk chair in case she had to go out. She put on a t-shirt and made her way into the kitchen to grab a cup of iced coffee she prepared the previous night and sat at her desk, turning on her computer to check her emails. The email titles were about the same as normal. Tarot reading. Need a love spell quick. Can you bring back my pet? Repent or burn in hell. But one stood out from the rest. Looking to hire a guide and guard piqued her interest. She opened it and read it. Hey, so I and a group of friends want to investigate a stretch of train track that are supposedly haunted in our area. We thought it'd be cool if an actual necromancer went with us and raised some money. Me, personally, I am somewhat worried, but I can't not go, you know? So I doubled what we raised. It pays 500 USD. If you are interested, hit me up. Dumb kids, Luna thought. Still, if I don't accept, they are going to go out there alone, or with a scammer, I bet. She took a gulp of her coffee and replied, I'm interested. For your group's safety, if nothing else. Email me back and we will talk details. Luna shook her head as she hit send and took another sip of her coffee. Kids on Halloween, I swear. At least they pay well. Over the coming days, details were received via email. The stretch of train tracks were in the Mojave Desert, and supposedly at midnight, a ghost train would run over a poor hobo who was passed out on the tracks. If you are there when it happens, his angry ghost will rise up and chase you, or try to lure you onto the tracks by mimicking voices. Luna had her own instructions before the day. I need everyone to obtain a decent bag of red cedar sawdust and a lighter. Such things tend to help one ward spirits away and force weaker ones out of possession if things are done right. To her surprise, she got an email back with a different suggestion. Wouldn't white sage or a traditional smudge bundle be better? Luna responded back, wondering if the one emailing her knew things or just played Phasmophobia a lot. It would. However, there are some who view using such things as cultural appropriation. It is especially prevalent among younger generations nowadays. So, I did not want to mention it, but yes, they would be easier to get, and just as good, if not better. She received an email with only the following in it finalizing everything. Don't worry about it. The night of, Luna arrived in a black dress, black leggings, and a black dress with some silver pentacles and skull pins. A belt with a custom attachment holding various vials of dried herbs and liquids. And, lastly, black running shoes. She got out of her car and stood before the 4 teens. Her pale white skin almost seeming to glow in the moonlight. She eyed them up and down, and then she understood one of them, a boy who looked like he'd be native. Holy shit! The necromancer is a goth MILF, a slim boy with blonde spiky hair said. Luna laughed a little bit. You're a little young for me, but feel free to call me Mommy Luna, she said, flipping her long black hair with her left hand. With a dominant sly smile, the rest of the group snickered a little. Everyone have their sage bundles and lighters? She asked, suddenly getting serious. Everyone nodded, and the 2 of the teens showed theirs. Good, then stay together and relatively close to me, and everything should be fine. Luna then smirked slightly as she added, Mommy will protect you. Everyone chuckled as they turned on their body lights and set out. So, you know my name. Everyone care to share theirs? The boy with spiky blonde hair that called Luna a MILF spoke first. Name's Lance. It was my idea originally to hire a witch to take us out. Makes for a better story, and for the shows on the net. I've seen safer. Double win, he said with a wink, looking back at Luna from his position in the group at the front. Luna nodded. Good call, on both points. The boy who looked like he could be native went next. I'm Dakota. You know me as Windtalker from our emails. Ah, I see. A piece of the puzzle's confirmed, Luna said, tilting her head to one side. A girl with long black hair and a slight Spanish accent spoke next. I'm Sophia, she said softly. A pleasure, dear, Luna responded back. The last teen, a boy slightly shorter than the rest, with a tuft of neon green hair, said, Keith. He's a little shy, Sophia said. Keith nodded, and Sophia smiled. We're here, Lance said, pointing at an old abandoned train station. Luna motioned for him to lead the way. Everyone moved slowly, carefully looking about. What time is it? 11:30 p.m., Dakota responded, checking his phone. We should move into the train station, such as it is. No reason to sit on bare sand while we wait, Luna said coyly, as she began walking into the old wooden building, everyone instinctively following her. She opened the door with no hesitation and walked in. She found the building being little more than a medium storage shed. Everyone spread out a bit once inside. The windows were long boarded up, as was the back door. She tried the light switch, and not surprisingly, it did not work. Figures. But I had to try, she said to herself. Alright, gather around the center and get comfortable. Don't get your hopes up, though. There are no spirits here. Is that bad? Dakota asked, slightly hesitating. Not necessarily, Luna said carefully. This got her looks from Dakota and Sophia. She pretended not to notice. The group had waited in the dark and silence for a little when they heard it. What sounded like a train and a scream played on an old radio, then silence, then it repeated. Everyone but Luna jumped a little. That does not sound right, Lance said. Dakota was a little wide-eyed, but his eyebrows were furrowed. Keith looked to Luna, spooked, and Sophia started to get up. No, Luna said, motioning for her to sit again. There are still no spirits here. What does that even mean? Lance said, snapping, a little out of nervousness. Luna ignored it and simply responded, It means either we are dealing with a type of haunting that is an echo in time being replayed over and over again, and there's no true spirit involved, or we are dealing with something far worse, Dakota said, finishing her sentence. Did you know? Is that why you hired me? Luna said, shooting a look at Dakota. There were some stories. I had hoped they were wrong, but just in case. Yes, he responded reluctantly. Did you suspect enough to bring Hearthfire Ash? Luna said with a frown. No, Dakota said sheepishly. What are you two talking about? Lance asked angrily. Yes, this is starting to frighten me, Sophia added on. Ask Dakota later if he will even speak of it, Luna said coldly. For now, do as I instruct, for your own safety. Everyone, group up, and do not leave this building, no matter what you hear. Luna moved swiftly to the door and closed and locked it with the flimsy lock that came with the doorknob. She then took a vial of salt, and from the inside lined herself and the group in as large of a circle of salt as the building would allow. She had just finished and took a seat among the group when the door handle turned, first one way, then another. Shortly after is when the voices was heard. Sophia! Sophia! Get out here right now! You have been out too long. I have come to get you. Sophia started to stand up. Don't listen to her. Listen carefully, Luna said quickly. Sophia, listen to your mother. Get out here right now, called the voice. You're right. There is something off about it, Sophia said thoughtfully. You are not going to like this, Dakota, but I do things differently, Luna said flatly. You can stop. None of them will come to you, nor leave this building. The doors and the windows are locked, and this place is protected. You cannot enter, and are not welcome here, Luna called out. Luna's voice called back to her from outside. We'll see, little witch. Your power is weak, and your gods are false. You cannot protect yourself, let alone the children, the voice said with a growl to it. Luna scoffed. The rest of you should not respond to this voice. Let it fixate on me. I've had to deal with worse. Do not let its lies and taunts breed fear, if you can. Everyone just stared at her. I need more than a stare. Nod, if you understand. Everyone nodded. Good. Now get settled in. We will be here until morning. Luna took a lancet and pricked her left ring finger and let the blood spill into the center of the group on the floor. The teens, already spooked, looked panicked. Luna merely rolled her eyes at them and took out a pendant. Teens watched it sway this way and that, sometimes swinging in a circle. Luna finally put the pendant away with a smug smile. Don't worry about it. Mommy will keep you safe, is all she said to the group with a wink. The night passed slowly. The whole time the voices could be heard circling about outside, sometimes being on the roof. It scratched at the windows and tried to open the door and each window several times, the whole time calling to each of the teens as their parents, trying to get them to come out with either worry or threats of punishment if they didn't. Eventually, it took only using Luna's voice to taunt her and the group. No matter the words and the scars of noises, the group stayed in the circle the whole night. Eventually, all but Luna fell asleep. Luna gently woke them each an hour past sunrise. They awoke to the circle of salt swept away into a pile in the corner of the building and the door open. Sun's blessing. It's okay. Everything is as it should be. Let's get going, Dakota. You know what needs to be done, I suspect. I can take care of myself. Everyone groaned, getting up stored and stiff. Come on now. Don't tarry about. Mommy is tired. She quipped with a slight laugh to herself. The equinox of fall, maple scents flowing in and out of the nose, feet crunching the leaves as they trek through the forest path. I feel a deep sigh leave my lungs as I finally see a cave entrance, blocked by yellow tape the officers had left behind the afternoon. Just how I preferred it. I don't like having their noses in my business. I was hired by the parents of the missing man, Justin Smith. He had gone missing the prior year. Hardly any evidence led to what had become of him. The only thing giving us any leads was a notebook with his handwriting within the cave. My methods of finding missing people have been seen as unusual in a sense. As a method actor would, I put myself in the shoes of the last known location of the victim and go through the evidence. I've found every single person I've been hired to find, so no one complains to my face. I hear their rumors passing around, however. I know them all. Stepping over the yellow tape, my footsteps begin to echo as the sound bounces off the walls of the cave. I walked in until the light from the sun had faded from sight. From my coat, I withdrew a flashlight and walked deeper. I came across a wall with a pile of dirt at its feet. A good place to rest. Leaning my back against the wall, I felt my body crumple into a squat. My hands shuffled within my coat once more, withdrawing the notebook of Justin's. Shining the light on the page, my eyes rested on the words and began reading. Day 1. I don't know where I am. It's so dark, so damn cold. It's hard to see. There's a hole above that gives me some light, just enough to see what I write here. I thought Julie and her boyfriend would have been looking for me now. Hadn't heard their voices calling for me. I'm going to look for a way out. Day 2. I walked around for hours, running my hand down the wall, looking for anything. I felt my feet slip a bit. When I walked deeper, pretty sure down isn't the way out. I made my way back up to the light. It's the only opening to outside I've found so far. I'm so tired. I need to rest. Day 3. My stomach is killing me. My throat is sore. 3 days without water and all that. My jacket was soaked with condensation, so I tried to wring it out for a drink. It helped a bit, but I don't know how long I can last. Day 4. Thank God it rained last night. I felt the cave rumble from the thunder of the storm. Water fell from the light above. I didn't have a bowl, so I tried to use my jacket to collect it. I think I read in the forecast before coming up here that it would rain for a few days off and on. I should be able to last long enough if I can make it last. Can't lose hope. I won't lose hope. Day 7. I was an idiot. I was trying to write using the light from above. While it was raining, I had to let my journal dry out. It took a while. Not a lot of dry air in here. My jacket was doing an okay job of collecting enough water. I think I've had a cup a day, I'm going to try to look for a way out tomorrow. Day 9. No more looking for an exit. I'm done with that. I've tried looking around the cave in other directions. My feet felt a decline in the ground quicker than the first drop I found. I slipped on my back and almost fell down the drop. I tried for a while and finally dug myself away from it. I think I'm going to stick near the light. Day 12. I've been trying my damnedest to ignore my stomach. It hurts like hell. I need to eat something. My energy is just enough to wring out some water from my throat and sleep. I don't know how much hope I have left. Day 15. Damn it. I heard someone calling my name from above. I don't think I imagined it. I think they were really out there looking for me. I tried to call out, but I couldn't. My throat was dry. My jacket was dry. The water's gone. My muscles felt too weak. I tried to slap the wall. I don't know what to do. Day 16. I don't know why I hadn't thought of this sooner. Desperate times, though. I've been nibbling at my forearm, testing to see how much pain I can handle. I'm afraid I'll lose my strength before I can prolong my life. I don't want to die. Day 17. I don't know what to think. I don't know what to feel. Just bit into my arm, letting the blood rush into my mouth and down my throat. I fought back my scream, letting the rush of hunger and thirst be quenched. I could barely move, but it's aching so much. Day 19. My arm looks dark, like moldy meat. It's not like I have any options. I still need to keep my strength up. At this rate, I'm going to have one arm left. Day 21. My arm is just bones, barely being held on by what's left. I think it's infected. I don't know. It hurts so damn much. I guess I'm lucky. I guess. All this starvation finally took away that fat gut that I had. I can finally start biting into my legs. Day 25. My calves are mostly gone. I think that's all I can do, unless I start into my writing arm. I try to write down before I do it. My other arm isn't infecting like I thought it would. It's changing. I don't know how to explain it. Day 29. I'm so hungry. This is the last I can write. I'm going to eat my arm after this. My body feels so different. If anyone finds this, please help me. The journal ends there, the pages feeling old, fragile within my fingers as I caress the book. I take a deep inhale and try to think of how to tell Justin's parents of his starving to death. As I prepare myself to get up, a sound froze my body. Hungry. My head shot towards deeper within the cave, raising my flashlight to shine on the source. A misshapen head was caught within the beam, a beastly voice coming from it. Hungry. When I was 14 years old, I somehow convinced my parents I was capable of handling a puppy all on my own, and I'm so happy that I did. One day, while walking home from school, I found a stray black, scruffy pup on the side of the road. It was odd because the previous owners had left him in a box, but kept his name tags on him with a tiny whistle with a C engraved and attached to the collar. Why would somebody ever leave a dog on the side of the road is beyond me. Scum, I said aloud to myself. He was completely unharmed, thankfully, but was in desperate need of a bath and love. The name tag read out Kane. What an interesting name for such a small pup. I thought I couldn't leave him there, so I did what any other decent human would do. I brought him home. He was so small that I was able to carry him home without any trouble. He was a good boy, obedient, friendly. He was mine. I arrived home with Kane, and after begging for hours, my father finally gave in. It honestly didn't take much convincing my mother to let me keep him. She had a soft spot for animals. So, with that, I washed him up, and we drove to a local pet store to buy all the necessities. He became very attached very quick. After only a week, we became best friends. Kane was healthy and growing at a rapid speed. I had no clue what kind of pup he was, but at the rate he was growing, I'm sure he'd be at least 100 pounds fully grown. When we asked the vet, she had guessed that he's some kind of Belgian sheepdog mix, but couldn't quite put her finger on it. She said he seemed a bit different than any other dog. He was extremely protective over me, the absolute perfect guard dog. Whenever someone even looked at me wrong, he would growl, and then they'd back off. I tried out the whistle a few times, but he seemed unresponsive to it. It was cool looking, so I made it into a necklace and wore it around my neck, never taking it off. So, you're probably wondering to yourself, why am I taking the time to write about my pup? Well, just wait. I had to give you the backstory first. Fast forward to a few months. A well-dressed man on the TV spoke. 4 children have gone missing in the town of Maran, India, within the last week. The kidnapper is still at large. There have been no clues or possible suspects at this time. Please remember to abide by the newly instituted curfew set by Sullivan County. Stay safe, Sullivan. My mother's eyes were glued to the television. I have never seen her so panicked in my life. She constantly reminded me to take my phone off silent as soon as the school day was over, and to never walk home alone. That was a hard one, since I had 0 friends at school. I did not want to lie, but I knew if I told her I was walking home alone, she'd make me take the bus. And that would be its own form of torture. Plus, there's just something about walking home alone that made me feel better about my existence. So I shook my head and promised. Big mistake. My walk home started out as any other. I went down the hill, crossed a small pond, and made my way into the woods. It was the shortest route, and quite frankly, the most peaceful. As I continued my walk, I heard leaves crunching behind me. I quickly whipped around, but no one was there. I picked up my pace just a bit. The quicker I walked, the louder the footsteps behind me became, till suddenly they stopped. I made a mad dash for the road, but just as I was about to step onto the pavement, something from behind grabbed me. I tried to scream, but they covered my mouth so tightly. I kicked, and I tried to bite, but to no avail. I did not get a good look at the person who grabbed me, mainly because I was trying to fight for my life. And to this day, wish I never saw him. When I finally did catch a glimpse of his deformed, mangled face, I felt a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. He dragged me by my hair to an old abandoned RV deep in the woods. He threw my phone and my backpack into a pile with the other backpacks. The sight, straight out of a horror movie. This was it, I thought. I'm going to die here. He dragged me into the RV. I saw 3 more kids around my age, hanging from the side of the RV, bound but not gagged for some reason. 3 out of the 4 of them? I remember from the news story. I tried not to think of where the 4th one was in fear of going into a full-on panic attack. Did he do something stupid? Did he piss them off? Did they just kill him for sport? My mind was racing. 4 days had passed. The other kids and I were given nothing to eat except for moldy bread and what looked like water from the toilet. I couldn't eat. But if we refused the food, the maniac would carve a piece of our flesh out and eat it in front of us. This is my life now. My thoughts went to my parents, to Kane. I missed them so much. It hurt. The only piece I had left of them was the dog whistle around my neck, tucked under my shirt. I desperately needed to feel close to them again, so, without even thinking, I used my teeth to grab the whistle and blew on it as hard as I possibly could, knowing full well that nothing would come of it. I quietly sobbed as I hung tied to the wall, succumbing to my fate. As I looked around the dingy, musty RV, I felt completely hopeless, waiting there like a piece of meat to be slaughtered. And just then, I heard the most inhuman sound I've ever heard my entire life. At that moment, I knew my life was coming to an end. The roof of the RV was ripped open with one swift motion. All I could see were the trees that surrounded us and an animal. No, a beast that was responsible for the undoing of the RV. The creature was standing tall on 2 hind legs. He had to be at least 9 to 10 feet tall, ripping through the RV, growling that inhuman growl. His midnight black fur and long snout made him look something of a werewolf. He was hyper-focused on nobody else but the kidnapper. The kidnapper looked terrified, but it seemed as though the creature was familiar to him. With one swift slap of his ginormous paw, the creature split the kidnapper into 2 pieces and devoured him right before my eyes. As happy as I was that the kidnapper was dead, I was fearful for what the animal had in store for us children. The beast focused his attention on me next. I was trembling and begging him not to hurt me, to please help us. We were innocent. The beast's face turned from rage to a soft smile. He gently removed my restraints and patted me on the head. As he patted me on the head and let out the words, "Good boy," he pointed to my whistle to indicate that this was my saving grace. He snarled, "Blow the whistle!" I blew the whistle, and that 9-feet beast shrunk down to a normal-sized Kane. Kane had saved me. He saved all of us that night. I later realized the whistle only works if I'm in trouble. That's why he was unresponsive when I blew it. He was only a few inches away from me. Boy, has that whistle saved me time and time again. Kane is my best friend I've ever had. He will always be my good boy. My good, kidnap, murderer, killing boy. Sand, splashing water, the smell of saline, and marine life permeated the beach where I normally worked. However, this day was different. This day was a day that I wanted to take for myself. A day where I didn't have to wear trousers and have my shirt buttoned up. A day where I could sit out here nearly naked without anyone looking on this part of the beach and be content with myself. All I brought with me was an umbrella to sit under, a few towels to keep myself dry when necessary, and enough food and refreshments to last me for the day. What I didn't anticipate about my plans was how far the water would reach me and how little time I would have before everything I had planned was swept away. The sun had started to set, and the water had already started to rise. Instead of making plans to head back up to the beach, towards my vehicle, I thought I'd play chicken with the water. I waited to let it come up to my feet and almost sweep me away. That way, I could have my fun of running away from the water and back up to the shoreline. What I didn't expect was a large wave to come crashing in my way. A massive wave that could have fooled me for a tsunami come rushing towards the shoreline. I barely opened my eyes as the water had come up to my feet, thinking that it was almost time to leave. I wish that I had been paying more attention than that thought. I wish I had given myself the proper time to escape. In a second, the wave crashed into the shoreline, pulling me in and all of my stuff out to sea. I tried to swim upwards towards the surface of the water, but something kept dragging me down. The current was pulling me away from the surface, away from the light. Everything began to go dark, and so did my ability to hold my breath. I felt myself starting to collapse and black out. Had I known that I was going to be dragged down like this, maybe I would have left that beach that day and never returned. It's one of the few things now that I wish I could have done. It could have been one of the few ways that I could have avoided him. When I awoke, I was suspended in membranes. He resembled a lot of the jellyfish that I studied as a marine biologist back when I worked on the surface. I tried to grasp at it, but it stung when my hand reached out to try to break free. It was one of the strangest experiences. I couldn't see the surface, but the seafloor around me was illuminated with light from all directions. There were glowing sea animals everywhere. Coral, sea anemones, jellyfish, sea cucumbers, and fish were all around me, all of them glowing beautiful colors. Unfortunately for me, this was the last time that my vision as a human would maintain its typical shape. Worse still was the being that confronted me at the bottom. He called himself the Elder One. He has sat at the bottom of the ocean for ages and controls the ecosystem at the very bottom of the sea. He is what helps them to breathe life into the rest of the world, and is believed to be the gatekeeper to when life all began. His myth and legend and tongues from around the world have existed long before I was born. Our own scientists theorized of how life originally began and thought of various sea life that existed millions of years ago that we believe to have long gone extinct. Well, the Elder One claims to have been from when complex life first began and resembles a being unlike anything I've ever seen before in person. It resembles an ammonite, but had the ability to contort its appendages to the shape of whatever suited it. I have brought you here for a reason, child. I maintained a sense of terror and wonder at the figure that was suspended in the water before me. Even more terrifying to me was how I was able to breathe despite no air being available to me. I mustered up my voice to ask, "Why did you bring me here?" "You have studied my children for much of your life, but your kind have done nothing but pollute and destroy the world in which I have worked so hard to help cultivate. For that, they must be punished, and you, my child, shall be my prophet. Through you, humanity shall bear witness to me, my creation, and my pain." I looked in confusion as to what it meant by that, up until I looked down at my arms and realized that they no longer appeared to be human. My skin was jet black with scales all over. My hands had become webbed with claws at the tip of each member. I looked at the reflection of the membrane and saw a new version of myself. I was no longer fully human. I had become something aquatic, something foreign to the former person that was me. I started to panic, trying to look for a way out of the membrane, only to find myself paralyzed in that liquid, suspended by the vibrations from the entity that reshaped me, that turned me into its violent puppet. "You shall no longer dwell in darkness, my child. Now you must feed on the surface dwellers who have destroyed my world. Feed on the humans, larder, terror of the sea. Feed." The vibrations forced the membrane open and sent my body swimming quickly to the surface. I could move incredibly fast. I swam at what felt like the speed of a car through the water and burst through the surface at the top. The sky had turned to night. The water was relatively quiet out at sea, and the light of the moon illuminated the surface. I took in a deep breath, immediately realizing that I could breathe both underwater and on land. The next thing that I realized was that I was incredibly hungry and saw that there was a ship full of people about a mile away. The moment I saw the ship, something came over me and I felt my body immediately swim towards it. It was a fishing ship that had just pulled up its nets. I made my way up to the ship and did my worst. The men who were all aboard stood no chance. They had nothing to protect themselves but their blades that meant nothing to my skin. I was insatiable for bloodlust as my stomach. I feasted on the corpses of the men after slaughtering them all, having more than my fair share. After their bodies had been dismembered for myself to have a taste of each flavor of human flesh, I threw their bodies overboard for the animals to have a feast. However, as my hunger faded, my anger kicked in again, because among the fishermen that I slaughtered was my lifelong companion and friend Nathan. He happened to have been on the same boat as the fisherman, as he always does on the weekend, hoping to catch some shrimp. I felt disgusted when I saw his face. After the hunger had left my body and realized what I had done, I had become a monster, but not one of my own making. I was no longer hungry. I no longer wanted anything but to destroy the entity at the bottom of the ocean that changed me. I realize now that it changed my form, my very being, into some beast that would do its bidding and feast upon humans. Those that I cared about, I was left with one choice. While my hunger fueled me to do these strange things, my strength grew, and so did my ability to resist the influence of the Elder One. If I could feast enough to satiate myself, I could fight the Elder One and claim my victory over the sea, claim the sea for humans and for me. So I made a choice. I leave this story to any wary man, woman, or child who may come across this ship and read this note. Flee the sea and take refuge from the beast that is me. Save yourself from my hunger, my bloodlust, and my rage. You have been warned of the danger that lurks in the sea. You have been warned of the terror that is me. No monster of these waters are a greater danger. Heed the warning of the one known to the ocean as Lorner, terror of the sea. I have been a resident in my neighborhood for over 2 years now. While I managed to become accustomed to it, I had a particularly rocky start with it. In particular, the unofficial rule in this neighborhood to never have Christmas decorations up before Halloween was closed. I did just that. People warned me about it, saying that if I didn't take them down, I'd be sorry. I replied to them that if me doing so didn't result in a fine, I'd do what I want with my own property. I should have listened to them. It was the 20th when it came. I had just gotten through setting up the lights. I wasn't a big Halloween fan, to say the least. I always preferred Christmas. In that regard, I'd always put up my decorations in late October. Sure, I'd get some eye rolls from people passing by. However, nothing really bad would happen to me, not until that night. I stepped back, taking a moment to admire my handiwork. That was when I heard it, up in the night sky. I saw as a silhouette barely illuminated by the moon and stars. Its appearance was some twisted combination of bat and deer. The most prominent thing about it was its fiery red eyes and its nose, which seemed to burn like a flame. I was speechless upon seeing it. I tried to rationalize it in my mind, thinking it was in fact a large bat, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. It coming into my full view proved me wrong. My Christmas lights illuminated it fully. It was a creature more deer-like in appearance, if deer had razor-sharp teeth. Its claws were so sharp-looking that I thought if it wanted to, it could cut me in half with one swipe. I didn't know what to do in that situation. It was blocking the way to my house, and I doubted I could outrun it with how fast it was. I shouted for help, only to glance over and see my neighbors turn out their lights. I mentally cursed them and turned back to the creature. I had no idea at the time why it was in front of me. What I did know was that I needed to find a way to escape it. As it approached me and raised one of its hands, presumably to strike at me, I thought fast and kicked off one of my shoes at its head to distract it. Then attempted a mad dash towards my front door. I got maybe 8 feet before it yanked me back and threw me to the ground. I groaned in pain and tried setting up. In addition to it sounding really pissed off at me, as an indicator by the fact that it was growling, my shoe was hanging from one of its antlers. It grabbed the shoe and threw it at me with such force, my nose broke. Defenseless and groggy from the pain, with blood running down my shirt, all I could do was watch it. To my confusion and surprise, it yanked free one of my plastic candy canes. The feeling quickly turned into fear when I realized what I was planning on doing with it. I tried to plead with it, but it was no use. All I could do was raise my arm in a feeble attempt to shield myself, as it brought the candy cane down on me repeatedly. Getting hit by one, being swung by a regular person is painful enough. Never mind when whatever that thing was is wielding them. The force of its swings was so strong, it broke my right arm, which is my dominant one. One candy cane beating was bad. Unfortunately for me, it decided to make use of all the ones I owned. By the time it was done, they were all in pieces, and I was a broken mess on the ground. My vision was blurry from the pain. Although I could make out it flying towards my house and cutting down the attached lights. When it landed back in front of me, I thought it was going to deliver the killing blow. Instead, it did something I wasn't expecting. It spoke. The only response I could give it was a pained croak. Its voice was deep and raspy. "Next year. Wait until after Halloween." It then pointed from me to my Santa lawn decoration, which it decapitated with one slice of its claws. I passed out shortly after that. When I woke up the next day, the neighbors gave me the smug looks as I passed by. The hospital trip was a pain. What was even worse was having to clean up the mess it left behind. Trying to find bits of broken glass and plastic while wearing a cast was not easy. I figured whatever that thing was, it was really into Halloween. Not wanting to re-incur its wrath, I made sure to get some last-minute decorations for the holiday in order to appease it. As the trick-or-treaters walked by on Halloween, I could see it watching me from the woods. Only the light of its eyes and nose were visible. Children and parents who also noticed it walked quickly by it. They reacted to it as if it were something they were used to. I figured this was the case, and now I am too. Every October, it can be spotted watching from the woods for anyone to break the neighborhood's unofficial rule. I make sure to follow this rule to a T, and even put up Halloween decorations early. As a result of my experience, I found an appreciation for the holiday. I just make sure I never put up any Christmas decorations until November. I don't know what that thing is or where it came from. All I know is that I don't ever want to get on its bad side again. If you happen to be as big of a Christmas fan as I am and move to my neighborhood, I suggest you heed my warning or it will come for you. The door swung open, revealing a huge ballroom. The lights had been changed from the normal bright ones to purple, orange, and reds. The windows were covered in loose cloth, making the moonlight weaker as it entered the room. Everyone had on tuxes and dresses, their masquerade masks covering their faces. He looked down at his invitation. "Mr. Kelly, you are invited to a masquerade at my house. Please come after the sun is down and enjoy yourself this Halloween. Mr. Rizzo." He did not remember meeting a man with that last name, but putting the invitation back into his pocket. His suit was black with an orange tie and handkerchief. The shirt was black to make the color pop more. Mike walked into the hall, watching as people danced and had fun. He fixed his fox mask before heading to get a drink, He needed a drink. He stepped carefully, like he was scared to break anything. The floor looked almost brand new. He got to the bar without getting in anyone's way. The bartender was just helping a woman to his right. It only took him a few moments before the man smiled at him. "Hello, sir. What can I get for you this hallowed evening?" Mike blinked a little. "Can I get a shot of tequila? And..." He trailed off, trying to think of what else he wanted. "Sir, can I recommend the host special for this evening? The Never-Ending Dancer," the bartender said with the same smile on his face. "I think you will enjoy it." Mike thought for a moment before nodding. "Sure, why not?" The bartender nodded and got back to work. Mike started to look around as he waited for his drinks. He noticed the woman who had gotten a drink before him, sipping on a blue drink, staring at him. It almost seemed to glow in the light. Her white fox mask matched her light dress. "It's a good drink," she said, smiling. "I've already had 2, and I don't like spirits all that much." "Really?" Mike said, smiling. "That must be a good drink, then." He took a step closer to her. "Names?" She put her hand up. "Nope. We don't give names tonight. Not real ones, anyways. You can call me Vixen." She put her hand out to him like she expected him to kiss it. "Well, Vixen, you can call me Renard then," he said, smiling. With that, the bartender put down his shot and drink, which was the same blue one she had. He grabbed the shot and downed it before taking the drink. "Do you want to hit the dance floor?" He turned back to Vixen, but when he did, she was gone. He looked around him and back at the bartender, who was already busy with the next guest. Mike left out a sigh before he started to walk away. "What an odd night," he thought to himself as he walked. And it's only just started. Once he took a sip of the drink, he blinked. It was different. Nothing he could put his finger on. It was sweet, but not overly, and the alcohol was completely hidden under the flavors. He handed the empty glass to the server passing by. All the servers had on bunny masks, wearing maid outfits. The host must be well off. How did I get invited to this? Was he a customer, maybe? Mike thought as he walked towards the dance floor. He felt a soft hand take his. He looked down at the light blue gloves that Vixen had been wearing. He followed the arm up till he saw her smiling at him. "Forgive my rudeness, but I had to powder my nose," she said, leading him to the dance floor. "Let me make it up to you with a dance, Renard." Before he could say anything, she pulled him close. "Sure." He was unsure about this, but took her other hand and started to dance. "So, how did you get invited?" "Oh, I live here," she said, smiling at him. "I am the host's daughter, one of them." She wrinkled her nose. "Oh, I wasn't supposed to say anything personal." The laugh she let out was almost music of its own. "But that really doesn't tell you who I am." He bit his bottom lip as he looked down at her. One of the host's daughters. She looked to be in her early 20s. "I am sorry I made you tell me a secret, Vixen." He spun her around and pulled her close. "I guess I'll have to get you another drink to make up for it." She shook her head. "No, it's fine. 3 is way too many for me, Renard." She moved her hands closer to his. "But I think we can leave the dance floor, and I can show you around." He smiled and nodded before she led him from the dance floor to a door he hadn't noticed before. It had been designed to blend into the wall around it. Vixen pulled him through and closed the door behind them. The hall was dark. The light was very dim. "You can't tell anyone I showed you this way. I will be in trouble for showing a guest," Vixen said, leading him down the hall. He looked at the solid walls. The walls were painted black, making everything seem darker. "Come on," she tugged on his arm. Mike nodded and followed her down the hall that turned right. Soon, they were heading down spinning stairways. When they got to the bottom, everything seemed a bit brighter. The walls were still black, but there were accents of blue, red, orange, and other colors. "Where are you taking me?" Mike finally asked. "Oh, don't worry." Vixen giggled. "We are almost there. See? That's the door right there," she said, pointing to the red door at the end of the hall. "You guys really like dark colors," Mike said softly, more to himself. Vixen looked back at him. "My father thinks it looks good." She put her hand on the door. "Open." The door opened on its own, and he saw a room he did not expect. The room before him had couches, all dark colors, but in light it was harder to tell what color it was. He took a step before him as his eyes locked on a fountain. In the middle was a statue of a beautiful woman, her hand out as if reaching out to him. Water ran out of her hand. He slowly walked towards it to get a better look. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Vixen asked as she closed the door. "Yeah, really amazing work." He looked over the statue. Her eyes were looking out towards him. Purple. He'd never seen something so lifelike. "It's like she's looking at me." "But she is. As a new child joins her flock, she will bless you." Mike looked back at Vixen, who had taken off her mask. She was so pale. It had been hard to tell with all the pale colors on her. Her smile was different, her canines longer. "Mike, don't be scared. The goddess of the vampires, Nocturne, has chosen you to join us." Her words were soft. He took a step back, but hit the fountain's edge. "You will join us, Michael Kelly. Once you are chosen, you join." He tried to step to the right, but found Vixen there, and the same as he took a step to the left. "You are too slow and too weak." She took her gloves off, revealing her long, sharp nails. "She will fix that." Before he could even scream, she covered his mouth, and the pain of her fangs piercing his neck was intense. He felt his world go black. Once Vivian was done with Mike, she laid him down in a room filled with others out cold. She giggles. "Seems my sisters have been busy as well." She closed the door before heading back upstairs for the next chosen one. The clock had just struck 7 as the first traces of night began to gradually darken the skyline. It was All Hallows Eve. A quaint, picturesque street lined with historic houses, adorned with various Halloween decor, bustled with activity. Costume-clad children and adults alike littered the streets with their candy bags in hand, with only one goal in mind, that being to stock up on sweet treats and the thrill of the hunt that comes along with it. Though this particular street was in the campus district next to the town's prestigious university, many trick-or-treaters occupied the area regardless. Mandy Price bruised herself while placing tea lights inside of each jack-o'-lantern. She and the 2 young women she lived with had carved. Once satisfied with the yellowish-orange glow of the lights inside the pumpkins, she emptied several bags of candy into a giant bowl on the porch. After placing a handwritten sign that said "Take 1" by the bowl, Mandy admired her handiwork. Satisfied, she turned and gandered out the neighborhood. Fall was her favorite season of the year, just as Halloween was her favorite holiday. A cool breeze suddenly drifted through the autumn-hued trees, blowing the fallen, scattered leaves across the yard in droves. Mandy's raven locks blew in the wind as a result. She shivered and then headed back inside. She joined her 2 housemates, Rose and Lady, in the kitchen. Mandy exclaimed, "I am so glad we decided to stay in tonight. It looks like rain soon." Lady shook her head to agree and replied, "Me too. Besides, Halloween parties on campus just aren't the same since the pandemic and all the social distancing rules now. Remember last year?" "Oh well, we can have plenty of fun in our pajamas, stuffing our faces with junk food and watching horror movies. Rose said with glee. The other girls agreed in unison and began to set everything up in the living room. They ordered pizza and ate while watching the movie Halloween, which was the first on our list of so-called scary films for the night. After a few hours passed, and the trio had lit a fire in the fireplace and commenced with making s'mores. With their stomachs full, they lounged around the fire's warmth, and they did their yearly tradition of telling ghost stories. Only the dancing flames from the fire illuminated the expanse of the living room, setting the atmosphere for the spooky tales. A few stories were told. The three began talking of urban legends, mythological creatures, and other lore. Mandy spoke up and asked, "What do you two think about Bloody Mary?" Lady faked a yawn, while Rose replied, "I've always found the subject of Bloody Mary fascinating. Mind if I tell the alleged true tale?" "Oh, bother," Lady huffed, while Mandy responded with an excited, "Yes, please." Rose crossed her legs and sat Indian style on the floor, and she began to explain. "The legend says that if you turn off all the lights, light a candle, and huddle around the mirror, you gaze into the mirror and chant Bloody Mary 3 times. Some people insist you chant it up to 13 times, but I've always been told it's 3 times. After doing this, the apparition is said to appear of a woman with blood dripping down her face, aka Bloody Mary. She will either try to scratch out your eyes or scare you to death and consume your soul. Anyone who looks directly upon her face is said to die." Lady let out a laugh of disbelief and said, "Huh, you're right. What a load of crap. It never actually worked. I've tried it with some friends before, and nothing ever happened. It was lame." Rose narrowed her eyes at Lady and scoffed. "Believe what you want. I've heard stories of it actually working. There are rumors that the most effective way to summon her is if they do it alone and not with friends. It has to be someone who is pure of heart, who believes in the spirit world completely. Only then can an entity such as Mary make contact into the world of the living. Also, it has to be on Halloween. That part is most important." The room grew still for a moment. Mandy pulled her sweater more tightly around herself. From where she sat on the couch, goosebumps rode her skin. She wasn't sure why. She wasn't easily frightened, but Rose's words had chilled her. Lady rolled her eyes and crooned, "Hogwash. Show me proof is what I say. Sounds like a bunch of baloney." Rose shook her head and replied, "As I said, believe what you like. You're probably acting tough because you're too chicken to try it." Rose began flapping her arms in an upward and then downward motion, mimicking the wings of a chicken. She then made chicken noises in Lady's direction. Lady tossed one of the small pillows from the couch and shouted, "Shut up, you goof! I'm not chicken. However, I could definitely go for some chicken nuggets right about now. I told you that I already tried it and nothing happened. Besides, I have something much better we can try." Lady smirked at the 2 girls, whose curiosity had piqued. She then teased, "That is, if you 2 aren't chicken." "Screw you. I'm not chicken," Rose defended as she threw the pillow back at Lady. Lady giggled. "True. You're more like a scaredy cat." "Meow. Meow." Mandy sighed and blurted out, "Enough, you 2. Lady, what do you have in mind?" Lady flashed a mischievous grin and then said, "Well, I heard a similar story to Bloody Mary, but it's much more recent. Not many people have tried it. I think we should." "Go on," Mandy urged with interest evident in her voice. People call the story Bloody Mary. Basically, the same legend applies like Bloody Mary, but you say Bloody Mary instead. Who is he supposed to be? Lady shot Rose an incredulous look, then snapped, "Maddie Shadows? Duh! Only our favorite singer of all time." "Oh, whoa!" Rose muttered in response, feeling flabbergasted. Maddie Shadows was, after all, the lead singer of the girls' favorite rock band for many years. They had been die-hard fangirls throughout their teens. They attended many of the band's concerts and had been devastated when just a year prior, Maddie had passed away in a gruesome motorcycle accident. "Let's do it," Rose said giddily. Mandy then spoke with hesitation in her voice. I don't know about this. Isn't it kind of disrespectful? I mean, Maddie was a real person, and I'm not sure if we should disturb his spirit or whatever." "Don't be a party pooper. Nothing will happen, most likely. Anyway, besides, who doesn't want to see Maddie's handsome face again? He was so hot," Lady exclaimed, as she play-fanned herself with her hand. Mandy wasn't fond of the idea, but didn't protest. Not long after, all three girls had gathered in front of a mirror in one of the bathrooms. Rose shut off the lights, while Mandy held a lit candle. Lady cracked her knuckles for dramatic effect and gazed directly into the mirror. With a smirk on her face, she began to call out the name Bloody Maddie. Each time, she would pause a few seconds in between just to build up anticipation in the other two girls. Lady uttered Bloody Maddie one last time. The three girls waited expectantly in suspense. The bathroom remained silent, and to their disappointment, nothing happened. Lady groaned and snapped. "See, told you nothing would happen. What a complete waste of time." Rose replied, "Yeah, you were right. What a bust." As the three girls made their way back to the living room, Mandy was somewhat relieved nothing had happened. Still, a small part of her kind of wished it had. After the remaining snacks were put away and the living room was straightened up, everyone retired to their room to get ready for bed. Mandy settled into her bed for the night, but Googled through several articles about Bloody Maddie on her phone. Despite her attempt to sleep, Mandy could only toss and turn. She just couldn't get the Bloody Maddie thing out of her mind. She also knew that if she was going to try it on her own, she had to do it right away, before midnight, because Halloween would soon be over. After checking to make sure her housemates were well asleep, Mandy quietly padded down the dark hallway of their home. Only the glow of the candle she carried lit her way, along with the lightning that occasionally flashed through the windows. Entering the foyer, Mandy gazed upon the massive Victorian-style full-length mirror before her. She took a deep breath and stepped forward till she stood directly in front of the mirror, just mere inches from it. Rain pattered upon the roof outside, as did Mandy's heart against her ribcage inside. Sure, she had her doubts that nothing would happen, but she had always believed in the spirit world wholeheartedly. Her two housemates' beliefs didn't match the level of hers, as they were both big-time skeptics. With the candle raised in hand, Mandy gazed at her own reflection in the mirror. She had made up her mind, and there was no going back. Her tongue darted out to moisten her lips before she muttered Bloody Maddie for the first time. She quickly matched that by repeating it a second time. A loud crack of thunder echoed abruptly through the house, startling Maddie and causing her to jump. She thought to herself, maybe this is a sign I shouldn't be doing this. Still, she quickly pushed the thought aside, and the name Bloody Maddie tumbled out of her mouth for the third and final time. As soon as the words left her lips, the gigantic mirror began to violently shake. Mandy jumped back, nearly dropping the candle in the process. She blinked rapidly to be sure that it was all actually happening. Mandy's gaze then was drawn back to the mirror, where a human-like shape began to form. Her sight fixated upon faded denim jeans that were tattered and had various rips in the fabric. Mandy's eyes then traveled up their way to a torso and a chest housed in a black leather jacket. Long brown hair dangled over broad shoulders, and splatters of crimson married nearly every inch of the figure's clothing. That was well enough confirmation for Mandy to know that it was in fact the spirit of Bloody Maddie. It took nearly all of her strength to will her eyes not to look up at his face. Mandy was frozen in fear and disbelief. Her feet may as well have been glued to the floor. She could feel her heart beating in her throat. It wasn't until a large tattooed hand withdrew from inside the mirror and gripped the outside of the frame that Mandy's flight mode kicked in. She let out a shrill, terrified scream as she bolted down the hall as fast as she could. Making a mad dash through the doorway of her room, Mandy slamming the door and locked it. She then dove into her bed, immediately covering herself head to toe with a blanket. She felt like a scared child again. But this was no time to be embarrassed. There was a serious threat just down the hall. To her horror, Mandy heard the doorknob to her bedroom begin to shake and rattle loudly, but she didn't dare uncover herself from the blanket. Just as quickly as the rattling started, it came to an abrupt halt. The room was left in silence, once again, aside from the storm that still raged on outside. Mandy relaxed a bit and thought maybe she just imagined the entire thing. Perhaps she was just dreaming. Perhaps she would wake up in the morning and everything would be normal, like it always was. Mandy was suddenly ripped from her thoughts when she felt a mighty pressure come down upon her body, the heavy weight beginning to press down into the mattress. She thrashed around as much as she could and cried out terrified screams as she did. The force from the figure had pinned her and trapped her in place. Deep male laughter began to boom throughout the room. It was then Mandy recognized that voice belonged to Bloody Maddie. This was all real, or so it seemed. Even so, Mandy managed to free her fingers enough to pinch her thigh, even though her arms were still trapped to her side. She was desperately trying to wake herself up, or at least confirm that she wasn't in fact just having some awful nightmare. "This isn't real. It's just a dream. Wake up, Mandy," she chanted in an attempt to convince herself. More laughter echoed around the room, till Bloody Maddie said, "This is real. I am real." In one unnaturally swift motion, the blankets was yanked away from Mandy, exposing her body from the shoulder up. "Now, look at me," Bloody Maddie's voice commanded and roared. Mandy couldn't help herself. Her eyes shot open on their own accord. Out of shock and curiosity, her breath caught in her throat. She came face to face with Bloody Maddie. She had no choice. He still had her pinned to the bed, with no escape. Mandy gazed on in absolute terror at his gruesome visage, his once handsome face now gaunt and covered with gashes. Blood trickled and oozed from his wounds and seeped down into the strands of his long hair. If that wasn't enough of a horror show, the once dazzling hazel eyes he possessed were now nothing but two black pools. The sclera and iris of his eyes were completely jet black. Looking at them was like staring into a dark abyss. Time seemed to be lost, as Mandy was too frozen in fear to move or make a sound. She'd never been so petrified in all her life. Thoughts raced and spread through her head. The biggest question that burned through her mind was, what was he going to do to her? As if on cue, Bloody Maddie grinned, as if he had read her mind. His sickening smile only parted long enough for him to say, "You are mine." The next morning, Mandy sat in her living room with the lead police detective while the other investigators occupied the rest of the house and worked the scene. Tears steadily flowed from the corner of Mandy's eyes as the detective explained, "I just don't understand how this all happened. It appears that both of your housemates suffered cardiac arrest on the same night. There doesn't appear to be any sign of a break-in, foul play, or a culprit to what caused the incident. I think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay until the investigation is over. Very sorry for your loss. I'll be in touch soon, and you will need to answer some more questions in the future, but that can wait for now. Take care, miss." Mandy dabbed at her tears with a tissue and rose to her feet. She gave the detective a quick handshake and replied, "Thank you, detective. Trust me, I will." She turned to walk away, and as she did, a wide grin spread across her face as her once blue eyes faded to all black. It took a moment for my memories to flood back into my mind. For a moment, I simply existed. There was no thought, no desire, only the steady pulse of my heart and the pain of my consciousness. Each throb of my head sent a shockwave through my body that kick-started each of my nerves with concentric waves of agony that pushed ever outward. My head was the epicenter. Each of my senses came to life one by one. My sight focused, and I saw the blaring patterns of the code flashing across the screen. Each loud eruption of color causing the fatigue vice fastened onto my head to tighten more and more. I tasted blood, and I felt the rush of heat spread across my face, as if I'd been doused in liquid sunlight. Air coursing through my nose and wind passage began to burn. The blaring of the emergency sirens began like the gentle striking of a wind chime, and grew steadily louder until it was the iron strike with violent prejudice in the forge of my mind. The human body, despite all of the wonders that science had brought to man within the past century or so, remains the most advanced construct in nature. Instinct took over as all my senses were reaching 100% reboot, and my subconscious began to take stock of everything. What I knew, who I was, how many fingers I was supposed to have, how many did I currently possess, etc. After a minute or two, time seems to run together in space. I began to piece everything together. Only things weren't as I initially thought. What I had initially thought as a code flashing across the screen was just an old film I'd left running while I fell asleep. At least, I suppose I must have. I thought I had a work shift the previous night, didn't I? I rose from my bed, my head protesting the motion with every minute motion on my body as I got to my feet. Each step that followed wasn't any better, my head ringing like a bell, chasing any semblance of thought out before I had time to form a coherent thought. I allowed instinct to take over, leading me to my terminal across the room and dropping me into the chair in front of it as if the artificial gravity doubled for a second. My desk shook and I dropped into it, which in turn caused the amber bottles to drop from its surface. I examined the bottles absently. Hooch. The good stuff at that. Never cared for the stuff. Never cared for old movies either. But I guess the loneliness of being the only crewmate not presently in hypersleep must be getting to me. The terminal blinked on, and a crude computer voice greeted me. "Good morning, Captain Ulysses Septim Austin." I found myself reflexively covering my ears. The discomfort in my head seemed to shift a little as I did so. "Turn off vocal interface," I grunted. The machine chirped in acknowledgement, and after a moment of collecting myself, I ran diagnostics of the ship. A three-dimensional model of the USS Kigori appeared before me. All the important life support systems showed to be working at an optimal capacity. Good. I love it when work starts off on the right foot. Speaking of work, I should probably check the logs for the previous day. My head was in such a fog, presumably from the hooch, that I could only vaguely recall running through my daily checklist the day before. There was a knock at my door, and my train of thought scattered like roaches when you flicked the kitchen light on. If there was a good thing about leaving Earth behind, it was never having to see a roach as long as I lived. The door opened automatically with a whoosh, revealing a young cadet behind it. The boy must have been a new recruit when he left Earth. He was young, thin, and had the look on his face that said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, and I hope you can tell me." He straightened and saluted. "Captain Austin, sir." "At ease," I said, trying to hide my hangover. Suddenly a question dawned on me. What are you?" As if anticipating my thought, the cadet spoke up before I could articulate my question. "I awoke just an hour ago, sir. My itinerary stated that I was to relieve you of your duties." Relief of duty? This early? Actually, how long had it been since I'd relieved the previous crewmate? Without a day or night cycle, time lost all meaning. I might have woken up a month ago, or a year ago, and it would feel like the same amount of time, to be honest.
What day is it?
I asked hoarsely. Per my wake-up sequence, today is August 4th, 4852. August 4th? That must have been some good hooch. Last I checked, it was May. That seemed wrong somehow. I turned to my terminal, clicking through the system tabs once more. We had detected a small exoplanet. When the Commander Corps had last been awoken at the same time, we had opted to drop in and allow the Kagori to restock on essential minerals like iron, mercury, and water. Our tanks had last displayed 75% for water, but given that we carried the last remnants of humanity in deep freeze, we decided that it was better safe than sorry. All minerals were at 100%, meaning that we must have stopped for that restock. But, Captain, the cadet asked, I found myself on my feet. Right, training. I moved past the cadet, moving towards step 1 in a long list of tasks that I would have to teach him. There was no way we could cover it all in one day, but we could do enough that he'd be able to take over and figure out the rest on his own. My eyes felt as if they were on fire, and my bones ached to the core. I must be tired. Weariness can do a nasty number on the mind, and when paired with months of isolation, it was logical. Still, I had to be sure. I focused my attention and summoned the avatar of the ship's computer. Wake up, Z, I said in my mind. I felt the implant in my brain spark into action, pulsing with a gentle hum that made my headache pound once more. The avatar, Zeta Brain, or Z for short, sparked to life before my vision, an array of vectors and polygons, weaving together to form a more intricate and complex shape until she was indistinguishable from a living human, with the exception of the neon green aura constantly surrounding her. Her skin, like the aura surrounding her, was a shade of green. She had long hair, which was neatly held in a bun atop her head. She had soft, pouty lips and a round face that gave her a young intern look. She was arrayed in the uniform of the United Earth Research Corps. She was stunning to look at, and I often wondered if the team tasked with designing her wasn't every bit as lonely as I was these past few months. In every aspect, Z was as real as one could imagine or believe. The only thing that broke the illusion of life was her eyes, which were just about as cold as the void in which we traveled. Her eyes, a green, the color of rubbing alcohol, were always fixed on me, but somehow never truly seeing me. I tried not to make eye contact with her for more than a few seconds at a time. Otherwise, that soulless stare felt too alien to confront. Zeta Brain program on. User profile Captain Austin. Loading interface. Diagnostics Z. Oh, there was that annoying startup sequence before Z's program was loaded. The empty-eyed bombshell of an intern spoke with a soft tenor of gears that had been running on Sen's oil for a few dozen light years. Captain Austin, how may I be of service, sir? Said the previous robotic hologram with the voice of a fresh graduate with aspirations of padding her resume with time in service.
Good morning, Z. Run a vitals check on the crew,
Vitals check is complete, she interrupted. Captain, the cadet asked, his voice sounding slightly muffled to me. I pretended not to hear him and asked Z to display the results of the check. The results flashed across my vision. I stopped dead in my tracks, the cadet bumping into me from behind, though I barely registered the impact. 30% of crew vitals were in the red, critical condition, or worse. Without a second thought, I broke into a dead run, fighting to ignore every ache and protest in my body as I made my way to the stasis chamber. There must have been some manner of system failure in the life support system, but how could that be right? When I checked them on my terminal a minute ago, they showed all green. I reached a lift and practically shouted for the system to take me down to the stasis pods. The door lift slid shut, and I felt my stomach drop as it began to move. "What's the matter, Captain?" the cadet asked. "Something is wrong with the stasis chamber," I said. "Some of the crew is still alive, but their vitals are dropping fast. We can't waste any time." "Captain, I just came from the stasis chamber. Every system displayed no malfunction," the cadet replied. "I know. It was all green when I checked it a while ago. Also, I don't understand." The lift stopped suddenly, and I sprinted in without missing a beat. Every pod, as far as the eye could see, displayed no malfunction on the display consoles at their sides. I continued running until I reached the center control system and ran a diagnostics check. Petabytes of information ran in just under a minute, measuring the heart rates, blood pressure, and other miscellaneous vital signs for every last remaining human. I could feel my heart and my head pounding as if trying to outperform each other. "That can't be right," I said, as the final check displayed all systems green. Every person in stasis showed stable life signatures. "Z," I called. "Verify vitals." Z appeared before me, and her vision went vacant as she ran a second vitals check. "Warning," she said. "Current crew members show to be under extreme physical duress. Immediate action is advised." "Show me a list," I shouted. Z displayed a list of over 1 million names and ID numbers, each of which was supposedly a person whose vitals were either rapidly declining or had expired. At a glance, I gathered the numbers closest to my present location and started checking each one by one. Alpha Bay, 4000. A science officer. Vitals, normal. Alpha Bay, 3024. An architect. Vitals, normal. Alpha Bay, 4003. A xenobiologist. Vitals, normal. On and on, each one showed normal, no sign of vitals dropping for even a second of the past 10 years of the voyage. But Z displayed each one in critical condition. The pounding in my head and chest reached a point that I felt like I should collapse, but somehow... "Slow down, Captain," the cadet ran up, apparently having chased me all through the stasis chamber. Z appeared before me and placed a hand on my shoulder in a concerned way. "Captain, your heart rate is reaching dangerous levels. Additionally, you appear to have several punctured injuries that could become infected if left untreated." "What?" I said. "Z, you're not making any sense. All the vital readings show normal on the pods." But then again, I could feel my heart hammering as she noted. The cadet approached me cautiously, a look of concern on his face. "Captain, who are you talking to?" "Z, cadet. I think she might be malfunctioning. She's showing faulty readings that..." I stopped mid-sentence. What the hell did he mean by, "Who am I talking to?" In order to make it possible for one crewmate to maintain all of Kagori alone, while the rest remained in stasis, it was required for them to receive a Zeta brain implant, along with other physical augmentations. Z, therefore, was a phantom AI, visible and audible to all who possessed the implant. "What did you say your name was, cadet?" The cadet took a moment to answer. A long moment. Too long. His expression went blank, almost as Z did when running a query. "I am," he started, then trailed off. "What's your ID, soldier?" I pressed. Again, he seemed to go blank. "Z, identify cadet before me." Z spoke up almost immediately. "Error, Captain. You are the only person presently not in stasis." The cadet seemed to blur and glitch before my eyes, almost as if he was phasing in and out of existence intermediately. "Z, show me a full scan of my vitals." Z wove a model of my body before my eyes, and highlighted several problem areas in bright pulsing red. My body had suffered injuries by some manner of blunt force trauma. Signs of it were evident. A nasty-looking puncture appeared to be on the right side of my head, right where the pounding in my head was the worst. I recalled the flashing of emergency colors, recalled the blaring of sirens, becoming accurately aware of the pain that had been coursing through my body. I felt myself sweating. No, it wasn't sweat. It was sticky, hot. Blood? There was no sign of damage on me. However, no blood, no bruising, no cuts. It was as if the impact, the pain, had all been a dream, and yet I was not convinced that the case was such. I held Z with my mind, and she appeared before me. "Z, focus on my right ear," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. The wireframe hologram of my body rotated and zoomed in on my ear. My brain appeared swollen on the scan. A cut was highlighted on my head near my temple. Signs of bruising were evident on the side of my head where the cut was, down my neck, shoulder, and right side. All signs pointed to my body being physically slammed onto its side. I examined it further, and the scan continued rendering, showing signs of trauma, as if something had forcibly inserted itself into my ear canal. My heart hammered against my chest, harder than ever. If I didn't do something soon, I was likely to fall into cardiac arrest. With a thought, I ran through a series of commands that had been programmed into Z for the event that a crewmate was injured on the vessel and needed to be resurrected emergency style with a sudden violent use of force. "Zetabrain, emergency medical resurrection protocol ready. Enter password," said Z. I spoke aloud, clear and resolute. "Clear." If the illumination of Christmas lights could be used to describe a sensation, it was the feeling of 1,700 volts of electricity firing through the central nervous system. I felt my body spasm, hard, as if being jolted awake. All of the pain I had felt previously coming into hard focus, as if I had been slightly numb to it before, or like I'd been feeling it in a dream. My body felt heavy all of a sudden, the weight of it very real, as opposed to a moment before, where all the sensations, with the exception of the ache in my head, felt dull and distant. I realized I was on the bridge. I had been this whole time. With the sudden and painful return of all my senses, the feeling of an alien creature's sharp, barbed, fallacies in my ear, warping my mind, was one of immense pain and discomfort. I jerked my head away out of reflex, something I wish I had done more delicately, given the sheer damage it did to my own ear from the motion. Still, the pain of a ruptured eardrum and nasty lacerations all along the inside of my ear canal, though awful, was nothing compared to the feeling of having one's mind probed in any way other than delightful banter and a back-and-forth test of wits. The alien, annoyed that I was less than willing to its advances, unleashed a shriek that sounded vaguely like nails dragging across the chalkboard. It was a lucky thing that I was currently half deaf, otherwise that noise would have certainly floored me. Using what strength had returned to me, I freed my right arm from the vice grip of that thing's monstrous, hand? Was a generous way of describing the appendage that held me pinned to the floor. It was more like the mouth of a Venus flytrap, if it was made of iron and seaweed. I fired my free arm like a javelin, hand open and tight like a spear tip, and plunged it deep into what I perceived was the monster's eye. I managed to get about elbow deep in my strike, and the thing repeated the nails on the chalkboard scream, an octave higher than before, which was fine by me. As if it went any higher, I'd be free of danger and becoming completely deaf, though. Dogs might still fall victim to the effects of this shriek. "Doesn't feel too good, does it, you bastard?" I said with a chuckle. I've been wanting company in the long months of being awake, but this wasn't what I had in mind. Inside the creature's eye, I began to flex my hand in an opening and closing motion, not knowing what I was looking for, but happy to be hurting that ugly son of a gun, as much as I could. As luck would have it, my hand closed on something that felt like a length of the rope, wound tight. Holding on for dear life, I pulled as hard as I could, taking the length of what I assumed was nerve tissue, the thickness of electrical cord, out of the alien's skull. The creature collapsed as if gravity suddenly affected it tenfold. It took longer to raise to my feet than I was comfortable with. My mind was racing with paranoia, previously aimed at my crew, but now locked onto an unidentified life form that was not opposed to playing mind games of the literal variety. I sent a series of commands to Z as I rose to my feet. My balance shot from the damage to my ear. Displays appeared in front of me, and Z reconfigured my suit, whose defibrillator had shocked me awake, to compensate for my lack of balance by reinforcing several proto-tendons the suit was built from. Each tendon was weaved such that it could strengthen or lessen pressure on a weaver's body, as needed given the potential change in atmosphere on different planets that the crew might venture off to. Now the tendons were being rewritten to adjust with my motion to offset any problem with balance. I glanced at the data Z had arranged on my display and nearly fell on my ass in horror. Though the crew's vitals had shown normal upon my previous inquiries, my updated parameters showed me exactly what I had feared. 30% of the crew's vitals were in critical condition, with some having flatlined. Other percentages seemed to imply that whatever was causing the physical distress had moved on to the others. My mind became dimly aware of the emergency sirens. Now that my life was no longer in immediate peril, I asked Z if emergency protocols had been enacted, as the reality of the threat had been assessed. Threat detection systems are now becoming aware of an assault on the crew of the Kagori by an unknown life form. Captain, it appears that the creatures were native life forms from the exoplanet that the ship were stocked at, she said. Sentinels were said to be roused from stasis as of 10 minutes ago. My systems show they have reached the armory and have begun to arm themselves. With a thought, she unlocked the weapon bay on the bridge. I took a pulse rifle, a plasma knife, and a neat little number that resembled an old-school taser. If those could fire a bolt of lightning, looking up, I said a quiet prayer and hoped that we were high enough in the heavens that it would be heard sooner rather than later. Z, patch me to the sentinels on our comms. Before I articulated the command, several windows appeared in my field of vision, each holding the face of one of the sentinels, as if I was looking at each of them through port windows on the side of a passenger vessel. Captain, a man said. I recognized as Colton Dallas from United Earth Defense. What the hell is going on? I had no way of explaining. How could I summarize it in any way to make it credible? Listen up, men. We seem to have picked up some stowaways on our last stop. One just nearly lobotomized me on the bridge. Alien? Asked another man that I did not recognize. As I live and bleed, I replied. You mean breathe, Captain? Said the man I did not recognize. Annoyed, I replied, I mean exactly what the hell I said, man. Now, arm yourselves, and everyone don the space helmets. It looks like these things like to hijack your minds through your... One of the sentinels started screaming before I could finish my thought. All the others turned their windows to look in the direction of the screaming soldier, each head facing a different way, based on where they were standing in relation to the screaming man. My eye was drawn to the window where the soldier bellowed for dear life as something dark and slimy shot upward from inside his pressure suit, bulging the otherwise skin-tight network of proto-tendons. A dark tendril shot out of the man's suit at the shoulder, and like a length of steel wire possessed, plunged itself into his ear, deep, lobotomy deep. His eyes rolled into the back of his head, and his mouth dropped open. Black tendrils dropping from his mouth. The other men began to scream, but somehow I could not hear them. My sight was so loud that it was drowning out my ears. What happened next was so quick that it's difficult to explain. Whatever parasite had clung to the now dead sentinel began to feed on his organic material, fast. Within seconds, The once youthful face of the soldier withered and dried until only rags of flesh remained. Soon enough, even that was consumed. From what little I could make out from my display, the other men sprang into action and grabbed a space helmet and forced it on the victim's head, thereby preventing all possibility of escape for the alien creature or their fallen ally. Commands were shouted that I could not hear. It wasn't until days later, looking back, that I came to the conclusion that Colton Dallas must have warned his team about his plans to open an air hatch and cast the thing out of the ship. The men sprung to action, each doing their part, Mr. Dallas presumably lifting the thing onto his shoulders, threw it in an airlock, and pressed the release, throwing the lifeless corpse and its inhuman assassin into the empty void. I took a few steps to the viewfinder on the bridge. The corpse floated by, weightlessly, limp, dead. I looked after it, in disbelief for a long while, thinking about how that could have just as easily been me, if I had delayed any longer. As the corpse drifted further away, perhaps by illusion brought on by weightlessness, I thought I saw the body hold as it spun upright and faced me. Through the cracked glass of my visor helmet, I could see the skeleton of what only a minute before was a man. One of my men. I swear for a moment, it looked as if it raised its hand towards me, calling for me to come to his rescue, but it was too late for him. I stood there, frozen by the feeling of fear one has when they wake from a nightmare. My heart was racing. I felt cold sweat trickle down my brow. My brain was ragged and shot. I heard the sound of nails on the chalkboard echoing through the hall, leading to the bridge. Reality was setting in. I took the pulse rifle in hand and let go of the fear. There is a local legend where I live about a monster known as Pumpkin Jack. Some say it's the spirit of a local come back to seek revenge on us all. Some say it's the true spirit of Samhain, only making itself known on Halloween night. But the truth is, no one knows where he comes from. Only a few people will tell you that they've seen him, as most never live to tell the tale. It is said that old Pumpkin Jack steals the head of his victims and carves them into jack-o'-lanterns, leaving them on the bank of the river, warning those who may or may not believe in Halloween superstitions. Kids believe that they are just ghosts, but I know better. It was Halloween night, and I was finally old enough to trick-or-treat on my own. So, my friend Ronnie and I have been going house to house and filling up our pillowcases full of Halloween loot. When we had exhausted our little neighborhood, Ronnie suggested we head to the next development over only a short walk down a forested trail. I foolishly agreed and followed. We had been walking for a small while when we both spied a jack-o'-lantern sitting on the side of a trail. I told him no, but Ronnie never listened to me. He smashed it with a powerful kick. The leaves rustled in a sudden gust of wind, immediately followed by laughter behind him. Taunting, we saw nothing. I heard Ronnie yell out, and when I turned again, I would never forget what I saw. Its body was ragged and covered in tattered fabric. Its hands were mostly like large claws with ebony, gaunt fingers. Its head was simply a devilish-looking jack-o'-lantern. This thing had Ronnie in its grasp, and I reached for him, but the monster looked straight at me, and its carved smile twisted upwards in a grin. I backed up a step, and when I did, I fell back onto the ground. Before I could do anything else, the thing simply tore Ronnie's head from his shoulders, spraying me with blood. What was left of his neck dangled beneath his slack jaw. The monster bellowed a laugh at me, and it blacked out. The following morning, I was found by a search party. Even upon seeing his body, no one believed my story. Not at first, but a few days later, some members of the town reconsidered. when another kid happened to find Ronnie's head on the riverbank, carved out eyes, nose, and mouth to create a twisted version of a jack-o'-lantern. And the warning was crystal clear. Obey the rules of Halloween, or else. Can you hear that? I stared up at the ceiling as the light of the foggy night scratched its way into the side window. A few moments of silence passed before I got my answer. Hear what? She rolled over silently. An annoyed huff escaped her lungs before she continued her thoughts. I hear crickets outside the window. I think there's a frog out there, but I don't hear anything else. You can't hear? I paused and thought about what it was that was playing in my head. I don't know. It kind of sounds like talking. I focused on the sound a bit harder. Yeah, like people are talking. I can't make out the words, but it definitely sounds like a conversation. You're probably just hearing the TV next door, or something. She groggily pulled the blankets over her shoulders and turned away to ignore me. This is the third night in a row. You're going on about this. Please, just go to sleep, Wayne. Her dismissal didn't mean much to me at this point. After 7 years of marriage, distance is expected. Still, the fact that she couldn't hear what I was hearing was nothing less than disappointing. If she wanted me to shut up about it, I would shut up about it. Despite this, I wasn't planning on going to sleep. I was going to figure out what the hell was going on, where that sound was coming from. For a moment, I just lay there and stared at the cobwebs in the corner of the room. I counted the water spots in the ceiling from the time we had a hole in the roof. I traced imaginary lines in the popcorn bumps in the plaster that covered the surface above me. None of this was helpful. My brain was racing, and there was no way I was going to be able to ignore the conversations as it played out. The best way for me to describe what I was hearing, besides just saying it was someone talking, put in a pair of earphones. Set the volume on your phone to the absolute lowest setting you can. Then play some sort of sports commentary or something, but make sure it's in a different language. Basically, it felt like that. Like I was listening to a conversation in a different language at about the lowest volume possible. Despite what my wife said, this was not the third night with the voices. This was the second. The first night, it was simply a beeping or something like a tone. Then the second night, it turned into the voices. And while she may have wanted nothing to do with this situation, I had to agree it was a pain in the ass. I turned and sat up on the edge of the bed, glancing over at the clock. 1:46. It was 1:45 in the morning, and I was stuck sitting there, listening to something that only I could hear. Unable to sleep, I pushed myself up and walked away from the room towards the hallway into the bathroom. Shutting the door behind me, I stopped at the sink and ran the water. Then I splashed myself in the face a couple of times, staring at the drops as they fell into the sink. At that moment, it almost seemed like the voices stopped, like there was nothing more than silence pulsating in my ears. For that moment, it almost seemed like things were going to be okay. That moment was short-lived, though the voices were no longer what I heard. At that point, the sound of conversation was once more replaced with the sound of beeping, that weird rhythmic tone that would occur every second. Beep, beep, beep. This was actually more annoying than the talking. And what was worse is that it was actually louder this time, almost like it was coming from the same room, or a room adjacent. I walked around the small bathroom with my ear to the wall, and for 3 or 4 walls, there was nothing. No indication that the tone was in any of those directions. However, when I stopped into the shower, the tone was louder. Part of me was certain that whatever was making that sound had to be on the other side of that wall. I thought about the layout of my own house for a moment and became even more confused. As far as I could tell, that wall was directly against the walk-in closet in my bedroom. If it weren't there, the sound should have been louder when I was in the bedroom. I shook off my confusion and walked back towards my bedroom, around the bed, and into the walk-in closet. It was cramped and full of clothing and various other stowaway items. But that sound didn't seem any louder when I entered. I started to pull the boxes away from the wall. I threw clothing onto the floor of the bedroom until the room was pretty much empty. The tone continued, but it hadn't increased. I once more pressed my ear against the wall that was on the other side of the shower, and at that moment, it seemed that the tone had gotten a bit louder. This sound, this constant beeping, this constant droning that was sure to drive me insane, was somehow on both sides of this one wall simultaneously. I pulled back and stared at the painted drywall, that shade of eggshell white that every modern home seemed to be painted, and thought about the situation. There was no way that the sound was coming from either side of the wall. It had been across both rooms, which means it was likely coming from inside the wall. Whatever the hell it was that was keeping me awake, whatever it was that was producing these sounds, had to be inside the wall. The matter of how was the question that I assumed I could answer later, but I had to find whatever this thing was. I turned back into the pile of items on the floor and grabbed a screwdriver, readying myself to tear into the wall, only to pause for a moment as I heard my wife snore. It would have been impolite for me to start in on the wall right next to her, so I took myself back to the bathroom, back into the bathtub, and back to the plastic lining on the wall. It was difficult, I will admit. At first, I couldn't seem to pierce into the plastic with a simple flathead screwdriver. Then it occurred to me that this was likely just a protective covering over the drywall, and all I had to do was find the edge. I scraped along the corner until I was able to pry a small space between the two layers, and I just pulled it away. The vinyl cover ripped away from the bare drywall, pulling chunks of paper along with it. After a few minutes and a few cuts on my hand, I was able to completely remove it. I then started into the sheetrock, prying away chunks of gypsum and successfully destroying the wall of my bathroom. From an outside perspective, I probably looked crazy, but I knew I was making progress. The tune sounded just slightly louder. I stabbed the wall over and over, breaking it more and more, until there was a sizable hole, leaving only exposed insulation and pieces of drywall from the closet. The wall between the two rooms was rather thin, but I was certain the sound was coming from there. I paused, listening closely, and waiting for the next hint of where it was coming from. I could hear it, the tone, and it was certainly coming from inside the wall. I glanced around. I was exposed, until my eye landed on an electrical wire that seemed to go further into the wall. Why on earth would there be wiring in the wall, behind the shower? It had to be the power line to whatever device was in there. I took my screwdriver and I kept prying away at small pieces of the drywall, tracing the wire all the way around the corner and to the door frame, where it went up and over and into the hallway. I tirelessly tore holes into the wall, tracking this cable that I knew had to go where I needed it to. A few times I thought I lost track of the line, but I just made a bigger hole in the wall to make sure I knew exactly where it was going. It ran through insulation. I ripped it out. It ran through the studs. I used the screwdriver enough to crack them and to pull the line. It ran behind the tile of the kitchen, and you can be damn sure that little cement wasn't going to stop me. I admit, I was left a bit of a mess when I was done, and what's worse is that my adventure led me nowhere. The wire I was tracing led to the garage, which then ended up at the circuit box, and out in the garage. The sound seemed quieter. In my moment of desperation, I had a brilliant idea. If this device, this annoyance, was running our electricity, then I could flip the breaker and it would go away. I reached up to the main breaker and shoved it to the off position. As soon as I heard the click, the sound stopped. There was no more tone, no beeping, no voices. There was nothing. I could feel myself grinning at the electrical box as the pride of solving this problem washed over me. I felt it was time to go to bed and get some sleep. I'd earned it. I walked back into the house from the garage and glanced around the room, only to be met with my wife staring at me from the hallway. She stared at me with her mouth wide open, her eyes shifting to the various holes in the wall, the damaged tiles, the detritus that was left scattered around our home. I held my smile. Yeah, there was a bit of a mess, but I could deal with it in the morning. "What the hell did you do, Wayne?" she screeched at me. I stepped into the living room and reached out to her, embracing her in a tight hug. She did not reciprocate. "I solved the problem. The sound is..." I paused as I held her in the hug. From the silence of the room rose a familiar sound, that horrifying sound of conversation in a different language, muffled and unintelligible. "Wait, can you hear that?" "You destroyed our home." I disregarded her claims and shushed her, pulling her away to listen to the room. As I did, it seemed to grow more faint. For a moment, I struggled to hear it, but it quickly clicked. I leaned back in towards my wife's face, and the sounds of speaking grew slightly. I pulled away again, and the volume decreased. I knew what this meant. I knew what I had to do. "I think I get why you can't hear it, honey." I smiled at her slightly, as my fingers tightly gripped a flathead screwdriver. "But we're going to fix that. Don't worry." Trickles of silence fell all around me as my heart quickened. There he is! I had seen him for weeks. He was there, always on my train, always on my bus. He was always on my journey home, always just behind me. He had been there, on my path, following my tread through the dark and rainy October nights, around the turns and beneath the tall trees, for almost a month now. He was a constant, a predictable shadow which predictably followed me every single time. He was a measurement of time, a guarantee and a reoccurring moment that could always be counted upon. He was my steps in reverse, a line of history which followed every moment, and he was here yet again, a few stops behind me, bathed within the glow of the moon, as he continued to mimic my movements verbatim, as I continued down the dark and winding turns of the country lane which led me home. Tonight, the world contained a glow, and the path before us was bathed within pure silence. The storm had been raging for weeks. The streets, paved in concrete, were still soaked from the previous onslaught, and they struggled desperately to maintain their purpose. Huge puddles collected by the side of the road, a magnetic target for seldom passing cars. The darkness around burned ablaze with sensations as the fresh smell of water against grass wafted from the trees on the border of the tight and lonely road. There's nobody around. We're all alone. The man behind me was ever my companion, the only other soul that dared to walk this road, this street, a road drowned in moonlight, a path that had long been forgotten. My home was not far, but the journey tonight, well, it would last forever. Ever since I had moved here, I had been made to endure the draconian commute. My employer had been less than accommodating. When I had explained the mitigating circumstances surrounding my relocation, and he had insisted upon my continued presence within the obsolete working space formerly known as my office. A presence must be upheld. A company must have a face. And that was their excuse. That was their reason for insisting that a young, single woman make a solitary trip all alone down a dark and dangerous path. That was their method, and ultimately, without a choice, that was my madness. My new home was secluded. The only road which led anywhere was a desolate and cold road. On a busy day, the road would be abandoned. Traffic would be limited to no more than 2 passing cars every hour. At night, however, The road did not exist. When the sun set and everyone had found their slumber, the road would be no more than a ghost, albeit a spirit of a pathway that contained little to no discernible life to begin with. It stretched for 3 miles, connecting the remote residential development I had come to call home with the main service road, which in turn provided transportation to the closest train station. It was essentially dead, only used by those with no other option. Unfortunately for me, I now fell under that category. It was quite fitting, really. Control over anything within life had never really been within my grasp, so why should that change now? Looking back now, I guess I always knew that it was always going to happen. After all, I was small, I was little, I was alone, and more importantly, I was afraid. They obviously saw me coming. They were drunk, they were loud, and they were unrestricted, but thankfully, they were mostly bluster. They approached me when I was alone one night as I made my way home. It started with a few inappropriate comments and steadily progressed to a general lack of restraint. They were close, they were uncomfortable, and ultimately they left a mark. By a grace, nothing obscene would actually taint me, but that night, the impression of fear that they personally imprinted upon me was hard to erase. The lingering thought of what could have was hard to shake, and suddenly, the terror was there, and it manifested itself so perfectly. After all, that particular fear was all too familiar. It was the reason that I moved, the reason that I shut myself away, the reason that I moved my life, lifted it from its foundation, and forced it stark against the unfamiliar surroundings that I now found myself within. It was the reason for my solitude, and the reason for my distrust of those opposite of me. It was the reason my heart quickened when I was alone on a dark road with an unfamiliar man. But it was not that reason that caused my heart to strain tonight. My heart can barely contain the emotion. The moon was noticeable in the sky, its wonderful white gracing our path in the serene splendor. The trees swayed as the rain fell around us as we walked in tandem down the dark and empty road. His steps echoed throughout the nothingness, revealing his proximity as they serenaded the sound of impending doom, clapping its way louder behind my way. Something bad is about to happen. The rain above me seemed to fall heavier as I heard him close the distance. This is it. It had all happened before. I had been in this position before. I knew all of the fear. I knew the terror, the uncertainty, and the apprehension. I was familiar with the feeling of helplessness, of feeling trapped, of feeling used, and of feeling abused. I knew all of the self-defeating thoughts that had swirled before. I knew of the storm which would rage within, but I also knew of the silence, the tranquility that would follow in the path of the revelation that had settled once the wind and rain had subdued. I knew of the purpose, and I knew of the strength which I had long forgotten. Behind me, his footsteps broke through the sound of the rain as he began his approach. 1 step, 2 step, he's getting closer. 3 step, 4 step, he's more than a few meters away from me. 5 steps, 6 steps, you are alone, you will always be alone. 7 steps, 8 steps, it's just you and him. 9 steps, 10 steps, tonight you take back control. The blade in my hand pierces the darkness of the night, travels through the rain, and through the unbreakable bonds of the silence, which held firm all around us. It tears through the solitude, breaking the boundaries of nothingness, shattering the raindrops in the air, as the firm steel sinks nicely into the soft, unsuspecting neck. Immediately, his eyes grow wide. Together, we share the moment. Time grinds as the raindrops fall in slow motion around us. His open, confused eyes glare wide in terror, locked in pure embrace within my own, a purity of a look which is only further exaggerated by the soft smell of dew escaping from the leaves and the bark to our flanks. We are alone, and we are one as the storm blesses our union, knife against flesh, past against present. No more, I utter, my words moving nicely through the fresh night air. I have suffered from men for far too long. It is clear that he does not understand. His eyes move in confusion as the blood seeps from the creation in his neck. How disappointing. I had expected the moment to be different, but as he looks upon me, a worried and lost expression pained across his unfamiliar face, it is clear that he cannot see the nature of my action. I can see that he does not understand the significance of what has been brought upon him, the symbolic nature of my intent, or the choice of his gender. I can see that he cannot quite comprehend the meaning of his demise or the message of my hand. I utter an unspoken word through my eyes as the color leaves his face, a stark white contrast among the darkness which envelops the moment. Almost too quickly, he falls to the ground. A wet shell of a man that used to contain a soul. No more. My whole life had been dominated by them. I have had to grow for them. I had to move and to adapt for them. I have had to be strong and grow stronger for them, but no more. Not anymore. They have created me, and now they will suffer their creation. He was only a symbol, a man on a train, a man that happened to live on the same crappy road as me, but what he represented, but what his lifeless husk would say, would be loud enough for them all to hear. No longer am I afraid. The soft, silent pelting of the rain caused a red stain to drip wet from my fingers. Tonight, my fear's been washed away, evaporated like raindrops in the night. Halloween is my saving grace. The one night a year I can go outside without a mask. I don't want it to sound like I spend all year waiting for this day, just willing away the hours with bated breath and anticipation. I would like to say I have other interests, that I'm able to find myself so engrossed in some human activity that I actually forget about the one day I can truly be myself. But this would be a lie. It is an uncommon hour that I go without thinking about the 31st of October, that glorious night when I can step out into the cool air and almost, just almost, feel human. The last Halloween was perhaps my favorite. My favorite day hasn't been the same since this area became occupied, since the human beings, with their warm skin and their innocent minds, begun constructing ramshackle dwellings with their imaginary borders of what was once mine. When I say it wasn't the same, I'm speaking quite literally. My favorite day was a different day before the humans came. Back then, what I referred to simply as my day took place once every year on what the humans know as October 23rd, a day of great power when the walls between the physical and the supernatural grow thin and pliable. Evil was released into the world on the 23rd of October, although such designations as months were many centuries from their creation. An insane, power-hungry beast managed to doom her entire species on that day. And October 23rd, hundreds of years ago, I often wonder what the world might have been like if she hadn't committed the ultimate mistake. It's irrelevant. I always end up thinking to myself, because I wouldn't exist. Unlike the naive human beings who roam the streets in their speeding cars and make screaming love to one another in their shoddy homes, I have been blessed with a natural intuition allowing me to understand how far in time we've drifted since our last cycle began. It is this sense that allows me to know the current year as 6020, and human years, I believe it would be 2016. Anno Domini are the words they use, words from an ancient language, ancient by their standards. But I digress. It was the Halloween of 6019, or 2015, that was my favorite. My day had always been the 23rd of October. When I was alone here, I would slip out onto the surface and enjoy the rush of power as I was joined by my fellow creatures of the night. I would walk aimlessly and without direction, as the others whipped around me. Some were burdened with deformed, hellish shapes, cursed to roam in the shadows of the earth, safe from humanity's leering eyes. Others were no more physical than the wind itself, and only visible to my eyes, because of the power that courses through every living creature on the night of the 23rd. Still, others were beyond form, beyond comprehension, no more than forgotten memories, drifting from mind to soul, disappearing in their acceptance of eternal suffering. Some have believed that I may end up like them. I have no intention of proving them right. When the humans came and settled down, they scared away my friends. Any human would find this notion ridiculous. An army of the supernatural, the nightmare of the most disturbed, frightened away by innocent human beings? But it happened this way. The humans didn't come alone. They brought their single most disturbing, most wicked power of all, the power of denial. Human children spend their time wondering what it would be like to share the powers of their fellow creatures. Wings like a bird, perhaps, or the sharp teeth of a dog. They don't understand they already possess the most powerful gift of all. Through their human denial, they were able to stare us directly in the eyes and inform us that we don't exist. My friends were terrified of the human's gift. They believed that we, as agents of the supernatural, would not be allowed to exist on this mortal plane without the consent of the human beings. Without their belief, we would vanish, becoming nothing. So they fled. They left my home and went to find a new world, one where humans were scarce or non-existent, where they could expose themselves once a year on October 23rd, reveling in their annual powers without interference from those who may destroy them. They thought I was a fool for staying, for claiming this land as my own. I'm not a fool. I know that the humans rule my world now. I know that I've been reduced to a shadow. No, to less than a shadow. But I did not abandon my home. For that, I will not apologize. It was many years ago that the first humans came to settle in my home. They built their dwellings uncomfortably close to mine. I watched them as they worked, staying hidden beneath the ground, marveling at how their species had progressed since the last time I saw them. My day came a month after the first humans were settled in. I'd spent the time worrying over what might happen. I was not paranoid enough to abandon my home, but I wasn't immune to my friend's terror of humanity. When the time came, I waited. I watched the human dwelling until after their windows were dark, and when they were, I waited longer still. Finally, I left my home and began walking, my destination unknown, but far away from the house. I was meant to feel exhilaration, the sheer ecstasy being closer than ever to the joining of two worlds, but what I felt was nothing. There was nothing in the air, nothing moving just beyond the spectrum of the physical world. I felt the cold night prickle against my skin, and the corpse hand of darkness caressed the back of my neck. There was no one riding through the air to greet me, no one crawling up from beneath the ground to wish me a happy My Day. I returned to my home that night, disheartened and full of regret. My day was over, and I'd failed to squeeze any semblance of pleasure from its dark hours. I felt as though I had failed, as if something I had done prevented me from enjoying this once glorious day. And perhaps I had made a mistake. Perhaps I should have followed my friends, away from this now tainted land, to an untouched world where humans were nothing but a harmless legend. With nothing but regret and disappointment inside me, I slept. I was awoken by a sound I knew, but was not used to hearing: children's laughter. 8 days had come and gone as I slept. I had vaguely wondered on the possibility of sleeping through the entire year, giving me a chance of reliving my day as quick as possible. But this idea was thwarted by the children who played above my home. I watched them, careful to remain invisible to their innocent eyes. And what I saw confused me. There were 2 children, one male and one female. I had seen them before, of course. They lived in their human house, with the 2 adults I presumed to be their parents. The girl and the boy had played outside before, often very close to my home, but never had I seen them dressed in such an eccentric way. The little girl wore a dress of all black, with sleeves that hung down past her small hands. A black hat rested on her head, its brim round, and its top pointed, like the beak of a crane. For the boy, it was a fancy suit of shiny black material, complete with a red waistcoat and a flowing cape. I recognized his attire as similar to that of humans I had known many centuries earlier, but why would he be reviving the wardrobe of his dead ancestors was beyond my grasp. Their clothing were unusual, yes, but it was their faces that confused me the most. A girl's face had been painted a bright green color, closer to an emerald than that of grass. Dark lines had been added, making her smooth face appear wrinkled and far older than it was. The boy's face had been painted white, with 2 red lines running down his chin. When he opened his mouth to laugh, I saw that his 2 teeth seemed to have grown longer and more pointed. I watched them for many minutes as they played in my grass. Their behavior was odd, unlike that of any human I had known before, unlike themselves in fact. At one moment, the boy appeared to bite into the girl's neck. Rather than scream, she let out a giggle and ran away. When the shadows grew longer, the children were called inside. Still confused, I tried to watch them through the lit-up windows, hoping for some semblance of an explanation, but it wasn't to come. And when the sun rose the next day, the children had returned to normal. I continued to watch the human family over the next year, and was alarmed when I saw more houses being constructed. For quite some time, I considered abandoning my home, as all my friends had done, but I knew that wasn't the way. Instead, I watched the houses grow like weeds, watched as my grass was paved over, and the horseless carriages replaced as the primary mode of transportation. The construction of the neighborhood went on for several years, and I watched the humans, intrigued, ignoring any threats to my own way of life. Every October 23rd, I'd leave my home after nightfall and wander around what remained of my grassy field. No one returned to me. None of my friends came back to admit their mistake. I never again felt the same electric rush that had once defined my day. I was understandably devastated, as I came to accept that this thrill, this all-encompassing euphoria, was now beyond my reach. And yet, as the years passed, I found myself with new interest, watching the humans, overhearing their conversations, following their advancement as my once grassy home became a neighborhood. I found great pleasure in watching the humans, but there was another interest of mine, another ongoing question that kept me enraptured for nearly all of my waking moments. This was the mystery of October 31st. Somewhere in my life before this home, I learned that the humans celebrated the 23rd of October just as we did. They held gatherings, celebrated the paranormal forces they didn't know existed. Sometimes, I heard they would even dress up, disguise themselves in costumes meant to terrify their friends. It seemed to me that the human celebration of my day had somehow been shifted. So they no longer took place on the powerful day itself, but 8 days later. This was good, I believed, for the naive humans to be mocking the supernatural on such an important day was not prudent. My day came and went many times over, until one year, I didn't leave my home. I was so enthralled on watching the humans from the darkness that I actually failed to remember the significance of that day. When I finally realized my mistake, I was shocked to discover that I didn't care. Watching the humans was my priority now. It was on that day, October of the year 6007, I believe, that I first began to wonder if there wasn't a way to resurrect the glory of my day. I had learned over many decades that October 23rd had been forgotten in this part of the world, that its power wasn't enough to get me high, but perhaps October 31st would function just as well. I eventually come to know this day as Halloween. The humans believed it was an ancient holiday connected to their religion. They didn't seem to even remember that the 23rd was the real day of power, but this was fine. Every year on the 30th, I would try to convince myself that this was my moment, that I would sneak out from beneath my home and enjoy the utter bliss of my day for the first time in decades. I was never convinced of my own thoughts and was always left alone in my underground lair. But finally, just 3 short years ago, I did it. It was the night of the 31st. I knew that less than an hour would pass before the day would end and November would begin. It would be another year of disappointment, another oath to myself that I would never let it happen again. I was not thinking when I crawled from my lair. Nothing was in my consciousness but the instinct, the all-powerful impulse that commanded my thoughts and forced me to act. Before I understood what I had done, I stood on the grass above my dwelling, the lights from the neighborhood illuminating all the human homes. I was shocked. Since the first human settlement was built in my field, I hadn't once been out in the open air, except on the 23rd. Yet here I was, standing in the darkness, my feet wet in the grass, almost as if I were a human being myself. I cannot say what possessed me to move further. Every instinct in my body told me to flee, to run and hide in some distant place with no humans to deny my existence. But I kept moving, somehow, my feet propelling me across the ground until the wet grass became pavement. The neighborhood was devoid of humans. Lights were on in many of the homes, but if anyone saw me walking slowly down the street, they didn't seem to care. As I moved, I wondered when I'd begin to feel that old rush, that old thrill, or even if I would. I knew that leaving my home was a mistake, but if Halloween proved to be no more powerful than any other day, I'd be at a loss. When I was nearly halfway down the main road, I noticed something creeping along one of the houses, a movement, though without solid form. I wondered for a single delirious moment if perhaps one of my friends had returned to discover the hidden power of the 31st with me. But no, alas, I soon realized that the movement was nothing but a shadow. In my disappointment, I failed to recognize what this apparition signaled. When the little boy came around the corner, I froze in terror. I was standing in the middle of the street, the gaudy electrical lights blaring down onto my skin. There's no conceivable way the tiny human wouldn't see me. It wasn't the same boy I had seen dressed as a vampire all those years ago. This one had darker skin and wore a costume similar to my own clothing. When he saw me, his face drew together in a squint. He didn't seem afraid. In fact, he seemed to be pondering me as a whole, as if wondering whether or not his concept of the world would allow me to exist. I remained in the middle of the street, unmoving, as the boy stepped closer. He glanced both ways before stepping off the sidewalk, finally coming to a stop directly in front of me. In his hand was a plastic imitation of a pumpkin. "Hello?" he said. "Hello," I replied. "What are you supposed to be?" he asked, craning his neck uncomfortably far just to take in my countenance. How was he not afraid, I wondered? How could he, an innocent human, and a child no less, stare at me, a creature from beyond his insignificant idea of creation, and not feel the slightest tremble of worry? "Well, I'm in your neighborhood," I heard myself saying. "I mean, who's your costume?" the boy corrected, frowning up at me. "My costume?" I repeated. I was at a total loss as to what the boy may be talking about. "Yes," he said. "Who are you supposed to be for Halloween?" Yes, I thought, finally coming to an understanding. I was facing the human power of denial firsthand. The terror sunk. What if I'm going to die? After all these many centuries, what if I'm going to disappear from existence just because one little boy could not understand me? Was there some way to prevent being thought out of creation? Was it to encourage him? To make him think I was some sort of pathetic human, seeking candy instead of the ethereal high, so powerful it could bring the dead back to life? "Here, the boy said, reaching into his pumpkin. Looks like you didn't get much candy. I took the morsel in my hand, staring down at the plastic label. Snickers, I said. I don't know what a Snickers was. Do you want it? The boy asked. 'Cause if you don't, I'll take it back. I do want it, I insisted, hastily slipping the candy between my lips. My teeth made short work of the sugary food. You're not supposed to eat the wrapper, the boy cried, as though I'd done something unspeakable. He was so pathetic. I thought his view of creation was reduced to this one neighborhood and what he wasn't allowed to eat.
Don't tell me what I'm supposed to do,
I hissed. The boy took a step back, and for the first time, I registered fear in his expression.
You never told me what you're supposed to be,
I growled. Oh, the boy muttered, still craning his neck. I'm a zombie.
A zombie,
I repeated, feeling the word around on my tongue. The candy had stuck to my teeth, continuing to fill my mouth with its sweet taste. I didn't like the way it refused to leave.
What is a zombie?
I purred. The boy took another step back, his expression growing another degree of fear. Some part of him, I sensed, some tiny iota of his being, understood I wasn't his kind. It's like a dead person who came back to life, the boy explained, his voice wavering slightly. I must admit, I am not familiar with any such creature, I mused. My tongue continued to dig at the solidified candy that had dulled the needle-sharp point of my teeth. They're not real, the boy said, covering his fear with exasperation. I noticed that was so human of him. They're just made up for comic books and movies. Not real, you say? I stared down at him, arms at my side, the claws of my left hand drumming absently across my leg.
What is real? I asked. What sort of monsters do you believe in?
I don't believe in monsters, the boy said. I'm not a little kid anymore. He took another step back, the fake pumpkin slapping against his knee.
Of course you're not,
I repeated, beginning to lean forward. My legs remained stationary as I've been at the waist.
But are you sure monsters are not real?
I asked. Yeah? The boy stammered. This time, he didn't move. He watched as I leaned forward. My upper half bridged the space between us. If he thought, in some absent recess of his mind, that I seemed to be growing bigger, then he was absolutely right.
But there are monsters, I continued. You may think there are none, but you shut off your bedroom lights and tell yourself there's nothing hiding in your closet. But my child, you're wrong.
The boy said nothing. He stared at me, fear and defiance on his young face. He stood his ground as my black eyes stared into him, past his flesh and bones, to where his innocent soul lay trapped in a mortal body, begging to be let out and to join me in the eternal feasting. I knew that yeah would make for a poor final speech, so I allowed the boy some space to make a few remarks before I tore his head from his shoulders. They will not forget me now, I thought as I carried the body down into my home. They will not forget me, not now, not ever. And they wouldn't. I finally understood. My friends had been wrong all along. Human denial wasn't to be feared, but to be combated. It was my job, and the job of all others like me, to push the boundary of the human mind, forcing them to think new and more ridiculous explanations, until there was nothing left but to admit the truth. Monsters are real. The human mind is a twisted, disturbing place. I realized this as I crouched in the darkness of my home, tearing the little boy's flesh apart with my bare teeth. The humans would lie to themselves, all to pretend we don't exist. Yet, at the same time, they would dedicate an entire holiday to acting out their pathetic depictions of us, for nothing more than the cheap amusement. Deep down, they believed. Every last one of them believed. And on that Halloween night, I felt the first whisper of that old ecstasy that had once defined my day. It was then, as I sucked the marrow from the little boy's bones, that I knew Halloween and my day had become one. The next year I was prepared. After the little boy's disappearance, several families left town. They were replaced by others of their kind, who in turn brought more, and eventually, my impulsive killing had the effect of bringing more houses to my once grassy field. To my great annoyance, one of those houses was built directly on top of mine. I had the forethought to evacuate myself and whatever remained of the little boy before construction began. I hid out far, careful not to be seen by human eyes. This was another of their many hypocritical stances. His scary face was to be praised on Halloween, but demonized every other day of the year. When the house was finished, I returned to my lair. The human bastards had replaced my walls, my floor, my ceiling, with hard, cold substances that I knew I would never find appealing. My home had been ruined, and I briefly considered building myself a new one. Any earth further away from town, but my friends had been unable to drag me from my home all those years ago, and if they could not convince me to leave, then no human could either. I have stayed in the basement ever since. The humans who live in my home never come down the shoddy wooden stairs, except occasionally to check the furnace. On the rare day that one makes an appearance, keep myself well hidden in the shadows. It was only last Halloween, a year after my impromptu feast, that I was seen by any number of humans. Yes, I had known some in my lives before this home, but ever since coming to my once grassy field, I had been seen by no human eyes, barring those of the little boy. When the sun went down on the night of the 31st, the children left their homes to wander the streets. Some of them were dressed in brightly colored uniforms of fictional heroes. Others had retained the traditional, dressed as monsters of folklore that would bring fear to their impressionable younger siblings. Before making my move, I spent some time watching the children through my basement window. They all seemed so happy, I thought, so ready to deny the existence of my people, yet so quick to wear our faces. It was a two-edged sword, I realized in that moment. Human denial prevents us from being what we once were, yet, in their fascinations with the supernatural, their obsession with a world they don't believe exists, that allows us to remain as we are. Denial is our enemy, fear is our ally. As long as human beings are afraid of the dark, as long as they create vivid monsters out of terror-soaked imaginations, I will have power. When I was sure all the children in town were out and about, I slipped silently through the basement window and unfolded myself onto the lawn. As I made my way out into the street, children turned to stare. Some cried out in surprise, some cowered in fear, but every pair of youthful eyes was trained on the tall, thin stranger in their midst. When I came to the center of the street, where their friend had died 1 year earlier, I raised my arms to heaven. "Happy Halloween, everybody!" I cried. My voice echoed through the streets. The children all seemed to be relieved as they resumed their normal conversations. A pair of Satans rushed by me, clutching their pumpkins. A werewolf scooted to the other side of the street, passing by with both eyes fixed warily on my form. I wanted it. I wanted Halloween. This, on October 23rd, was the true day of power, not some foolish anniversary of evil long past, but a holiday based entirely on fear, celebrated all across the globe. For the first time in many, many years, I felt the thrill building in my soul. I felt that high, that euphoria that had once been accompanied by ghostly figures riding through the night. I stared at the scene before me, all around me, and I knew that Halloween was my day now. Slowly, I stepped forward, a crowd of children surrounding me, all babbling and laughing in excitement. I paid no attention to their words. Instead, I spread out my arms, allowing the tips of my fingers to brush against every child as I passed. I could feel them beyond a physical touch. I could feel their excitement, their pleasure, but most importantly, buried deep in the parts of their minds that forced maturity to blossom, their fear. They were all afraid. On some level, what else are human beings good for but to fear and deny that they are afraid? Perhaps some of the adult residents of my town wondered where the tall man in the hideous mask had come from. Perhaps some of them, in the furthest reaches of their conscious thoughts, wondered if I had anything to do with a child who had gone missing a year before. I hope they did. I hope they stood at their windows, watching me brush my hands against their children as they towered 3 times as tall as the tallest one, and agonized over the question of whether or not they are becoming paranoid, delusional, perhaps insane with the unanswered question that had followed the boy to his grave. I hope wherever my old friends are, whatever part of the world they have decided is suitably human-free, I hope they are never happy again. I hope they never feel the brilliant fireworks of pleasure we used to share every October 23rd. I hope they never find out that true immortal bliss is only 8 days removed. Above all, I hope the human race continues to grow. I hope they flourish, each of them enjoying long, terrifying lives. They all have children, and their children have children. I hope they teach every new generation the true meaning of fear. I am the meaning of fear. My friends believe that they were incapable of being afraid, but they were afraid of humans and the power they hold. They are afraid that any flesh and blood mortal could simply wish them out of existence, and perhaps they could, but not with me there, not with me hiding in the shadows, not with me lurking behind every corner, waiting until their fear reaches its climax and I strike. Manipulation is my game, and terror is my drug. I am Halloween.